everyone knows a sound that pulls them out of whatever they're doing, like the creak of a particular floorboard, an old ringtone somewhere in a crowd, a stranger calling your name. There are these little buttons in the back of our minds that can stop our thoughts and put us straight into the here and now. I want to tell you about one of those sounds and why it haunts me to this day. Back when I studied at MSU, I had a pretty tight-knit group of friends. There were 8 of us at one point, spending almost every day together. It was equal parts study circle, drinking buddies, and group therapy. But as our studies and lives progressed, they dropped off one by one, relegating themselves to inactive group chats and the occasional Instagram like. Many moved across the country to pursue their careers. 3 of us stuck around. There was me, a fresh sociology major with a budding career in business development consultation. There was Greg, the life of the party. He had that look of someone born to wear dad khakis. And finally, there was Stuart, the kind of guy who keeps getting knocked down but gets back up with a smile, always chasing opportunities and never saying no. Over time, our escapades calmed. Wild pub crawls turned to the occasional night in the town, playing pool, singing karaoke, or watching a game at a sports bar, on wing night of course. Those days would usually play out the same way. Greg would message us with some idea, Stuart would pull me along, and that would be that. It was a nice routine and a clean break from the minutiae of work. We were all single at that point, sharing the woes and tribulations of modern dating. Whenever somebody was ghosted or got stood up, there was always a friend ready to hear us out. Greg started seeing this girl, and all of a sudden, it was just me and Stuart left. The group chats grew further and far between. Stuart and I ended up spending a lot of time together, turning a once booming group into a solid wingman team. Stuart wasn't the kind of guy to hit on women left and right. He was looking for that special someone. He grew up in a religious household and was the second oldest of 5 brothers, so there was some expectation that he would find his way eventually. And that was part of why he kept up his cheery demeanor. He had faith that God was cooking up something good for him. So at the end of every night when we drunkenly stumbled to an Uber, he would do this thing where he bobbed his head and snapped his fingers, like he was listening to a song that nobody else could hear. Snap, 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 snap. He explained it as a sort of tick. Now when you got the beat, you gotta let it out, he would say. Gotta keep the music going. When it stops, you stop, you know. It was his way of keeping the mood up despite everything. Whenever he got nervous, anxious, or just plain old sad, he would snap his fingers like someone trying to pull start a dried up engine. It worked most of the time. I did see him get upset, but it was mostly about things out of his control. Showing up late to a club after getting stuck in traffic, only to end up at the back of the line, and getting stood up on a Hinge date. He was stuck in a job that he hated, in an apartment that had a roach problem. He would try to pass off his second-hand clothes as vintage rather than cheap, but there was a whiff of mildew to them that wouldn't go away. But through it all, he kept his smile up and his beat going strong. Snap, snap. It was late July when Stuart came to me with a plan. He was going to go out with this girl, Nicole, and he wanted to see if we could turn it into a double date. I was fairly active on the dating scene, but I wasn't looking for anything serious. I was starting a career and looking for a place to settle. I didn't even know if I was going to stay in the same state. But still, I had a friend at work who had offered to set me up with a blind date, and so I agreed. Stuart was hyped, to say the least. "You gotta meet her," he wrote. "Nicole is perfect. I'm telling you, this is it." I had seen Stuart's musing before, so this wasn't out of the ordinary. But he made a tad more effort than usual, and for Stuart, that counted for something. I decided I would make an effort to prop him up and be a good wingman. The guy could use all the help that he could get. When the big night rolled around, we met up at my place before heading out. Stuart had spent some of his salary on a new shirt and pants. He tried to fix his hair in a way to fake a fresh haircut. It looked nice, different. The shirt was a bit too large, making his already skinny arms look even skinnier, but you could tell that he was trying. He was excited, snapping his fingers quicker than usual. I got a good feeling about this. This is our 4th date. It's going places. I was happy for him. I offered to be the DD and he made some suggestions how I could wingman him a bit. He told me about Nicole's many likes and dislikes, her demeanor, and he kept showing me pictures of her. He was right, she was gorgeous. But the way he described her as a person made me think of a mean kindergarten teacher. We met up with Nicole and my blind date at a bar downtown. My blind date was a bookish woman with a shy smile and Harry Potter-style glasses. Adorable, but clearly out of her comfort zone. We all made introductions and the evening was on. I think Stuart was nervous. He kept getting mojitos for him and Nicole, but she barely managed to finish her first before he was on his third. He was sweating like a leaking hose, and his 100-mile-per-hour style of questioning sounded less like genuine interest and more like speed interrogation. And meanwhile, my blind date spent most of her time texting in the bathroom. It got to the point where the one I ended up spending the most time with was ironically Nicole. Whenever Stuart walked off, she would let out a sigh. He can be a bit much, I said, but he's a great guy. Yeah, I believe you, she said. He's been great. How he gets this way when he's excited, kind of like a golden retriever. I'm not much of a dog person. Figures. She rolled her eyes at me and I rolled them right back. That cracked a smile. You're more of an iguana person, I added. Tell me I'm wrong. Yeah, cold-blooded all the way, she snorted back. That or a fruit bat. They seem chill. My blind date excused herself after about an hour, leaving me as the awkward third wheel to an already awkward date. Stuart ended up spending most of the evening in the bathroom trying to keep a 4th mojito down, while I tried to keep Nicole from walking out. We ended up having a pretty good talk. A lot of what came off as cold and distant about her was just sarcasm, and if you looked past it, you could see that she was a genuine person. She listened with intent and could really make you feel seen. By the time we left the bar, it was dark and there was a distant thumping of music and cheers. Stuart gestured at me to go ahead, but Nicole shook her head, silently asking me to give them a minute. I stepped away but saw the whole thing from across the street. She was shutting him down hard. I didn't need to hear the words. I saw the inflated body language. She gave him a best of luck kind of hug before leaving. Stuart just stood there, not even snapping his fingers anymore. There was an emptiness in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. She was the one, he said, and there she goes. Stuart was crushed. He tended to get his hopes up too fast and it kept coming back to bite him, but this time it was really bad. At one point, I got in touch with Nicole online just to see if I could push things along. I asked her if it was something that he did or if there was something that he could do to fix it, but she made it clear that it was a matter of preference. She had nothing but good things to say about Stuart, but things weren't going to go any further, and that's how she and I got talking. It wasn't anything serious, just the occasional rant about something going on in our everyday lives. It wasn't even flirty, she was just fun to talk to. She always had a quip about something ready to go. There was never a dull moment or needless silence. And after about a month, we decided to go on a date of our own. It wasn't meant to be a behind Stuart's back kind of thing. I wanted to talk to him about it eventually, but he was still pining for her. I felt a bit bad about it, but Nicole made it very clear that she was moving on. She couldn't have made it clearer. So, while I didn't want to disappoint a friend of mine, I also wasn't about to pass on a good thing. Nicole and I clicked almost instantly. I've never met a woman that can make me belly laugh to the point where my stomach hurts. She had absolutely no filter, and I really felt like I could open up around her. We had a great time, and it was evident that this wouldn't be the last time that we saw each other. One date turned into several, and before I knew it, I couldn't imagine my days without her. Stuart was still struggling, but he kept his smile up. Snap, snap. We'd talk every other day or so, and I would ask how things were going. He would try to find a positive spin to anything and everything. I got a like, but I think it's a bot, he would say. But hey, AI girlfriends are all the rage these days. Or something like, it's just a couple roaches. Hey, at least it's not bedbugs. That would have sucked. He tried to keep it all together and tough it out. I'd help him out whenever I could, but sometimes he was his own worst enemy. He'd be so focused on plans at 10 years from now that he couldn't see what was right in front of him. It was only a matter of time before he found out about me and Nicole. He saw us at one of the local hangouts. I had my arm around her as she casually explained her latest hyperfixation. By the time that I noticed Stuart, there was no way to hide it. He didn't do anything stupid or dramatic. He just waved, snapped his fingers, and left us alone. But I could tell that there was something more to it. Something about the way he moved reminded me of a gazelle ready to sprint, like he had this pent-up energy ready to burst. I watched as he walked up to the bar, stayed there for a couple of minutes and didn't order anything, and then promptly left. Later that night, I texted him. I apologized and explained that I wanted to wait until he was in a better space before I told him. All I got in response was a smiley face. Over the next few weeks, things got serious between me and Nicole. She ended up spending most of the time at my place, and I started to notice little things of her popping up around my apartment. I didn't mind. She was getting comfortable, and that made me comfortable in turn. But Stuart hung over us like a ghost. Whenever we saw him, he would just stand there quietly snapping his fingers, always with that same forced smile. He stopped responding to my texts and messages and giving me nothing but an occasional smiley in return. We're playing pool tonight. You want to tag along? I would ask. Smiley face. Hey, you okay? We thought about seeing the new Alien movie. We got an extra ticket. Smiley face. After a while, I just stopped talking to him. Things took its course. A couple of months would pass and Nicole and I talked about moving in together. Stuart was far from our minds and we had moved on. I was on the verge of getting a promotion at work. The guy who was my senior was about to retire. We thought about waiting until then to get a bigger place. I had met her parents and she had met mine. We had done all the serious couple things without ever defining ourselves as such. And then I got a call from Greg. I was surprised. I hadn't heard from him in a while. Hey man, we gotta talk, he said. In private. I had never heard Greg use that tone before. Something was up. We met at a cafe later that day. The dinner rush had just passed, leaving behind a gaggle of murmurs as customers lingered behind their empty plates. Greg and I just had a coffee, huddling up in a corner by the window. I went to see Stuart. Haven't heard from him in a while, Greg said. You ever been to his place? No, I admitted. Heard it was a shithole though. It's fake. A fake address, a fake everything. What? And Greg showed me a couple of images from his phone. He had checked out the address that Stuart was registered at, but the place was a Chinese restaurant. His job's the same thing. I went by to check on him. They've never had a Stuart working there. You heard anything from his family? No names, no numbers. He only mentions them in passing. So we got nothing. We don't know anything. Apparently, he was never signed up for any classes at MSU, couldn't find his name anywhere. So this guy just showed up one day and we got nothing on him. And pretty much, yeah. For the better part of an hour, we dissected all we knew about Stuart. We didn't know where he had lived, what he did for work, or even how old he was. On his socials, he just referred to his last name as the letter P. And the more we cataloged, the more we realized we didn't know this person at all. Not like we thought we did. But there was nothing that we could do. We couldn't reach him, and there was not much that we could say. Yeah, the guy was trouble, but we had no idea what kind of trouble. He hadn't really done anything. We couldn't call the cops on somebody just for being private. So in the end, Greg and I could just nod at each other and agree that this was all just weird. I went to see Nicole that night to tell her about all of it. A wind picked up in anticipation of the coming rain, making the trees crackle and bend as I hurried down a long street. As I reached Nicole's door, I stopped. I don't know what compelled me to do so. I looked across the street. I don't think there was anyone there, but it felt like I was looking somebody straight in the eye. And I heard it, I think. Or maybe I imagined it. Snap, snap. I stayed up for a couple of hours talking to Nicole about what we had discovered. Nicole was worried, but there wasn't much that we could say or do. I had texted Stuart everything from apologies to just asking him to stay away, but I never got more than a smiley in response. Nicole didn't know what to say. That night as we went to bed, she turned to me, nuzzling up against my shoulder, melting away the anxieties of the day. He always had this vision, she explained. Like he already had our story planned out. He thought we were gonna fall in love and move in together and be a cute, mismatched couple. But I was never really part of the conversation. Yeah, that sounds like him. And do you think he's still trying to tell that story? It wasn't impossible. Stuart had a penchant for being a bit dramatic, and he sure as hell could stick to an idea. But this could mean anything in practice. There was no way to tell. I held her close that night, listening to her drift off to sleep. And as she did, I wondered if I could hear that snapping from outside if I listened hard enough. The next day began no differently from any other. We got dressed, had breakfast, and went our separate ways. We waved our goodbyes and promised to text and call throughout the day. She was going to come over to my place later that night. That's not what happened though. Somewhere around 2 p.m. I started getting messages, someone from Nicole's job, and then a friend of a friend, and then a text from an acquaintance. Panicked phone calls, invites to group chats, and then the police. Apparently at 1:47 p.m., 3 masked men had pulled Nicole out of her car at a red light. A van was seen heading south, crossing the highway and disappearing into suburbia. One of the masked men were seen snapping their fingers, like a tick. I've never had something like this happen before. You don't even hear about these things on the news around here. Someone getting pulled out of their car at a red light. How does that happen? 2 police officers came to see me at my job. As the significant other, you're immediately at the top of the suspect list, but I had plenty of people to vouch for me. I rambled on and on about Stuart and how he had been this thorn in our sides for weeks, but they were very dismissive. We're pursuing several leads. One of them assured me, we'll keep in touch. I was given some contact info and then they were on their way, leaving me gutted in the break room. Trying to imagine what was going on made me sick. I spent a good 10 minutes in the bathroom trying to keep my head from spinning. All the while, my phone kept going off. They were all asking questions that nobody had answers to. I took the rest of the day off and I met up with Greg. Together, we started looking through what little information was available online Called the contact at the police station and asked around on our socials about a guy with a snapping tic. Someone must have seen something, heard something. And luckily, we didn't have to wait long. Apparently, several people knew someone who matched Stuart's weird finger snapping tic. I met a girl at a pub who kept doing that over and over, one wrote. I think I've seen some of my son's friends snapping like that, said another. Have you checked the storage units? I've seen a guy like that go by at least twice a week. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was around 6 p.m. when we got there. The sun was about to set, casting long shadows that crawled up the walls. We went past row after row of green metal doors looking for the manager's office. It didn't take long to spot it. It was the only place that had some kind of lighting still going. We introduced ourselves and explained the situation. He knew exactly who we were talking about. A guy comes by 2 or 3 times a week, he said. You really think he hurt someone? Kidnapped, Greg clarified. Not sure about hurting. Well, I can't get you access to his unit, but I can show you where it is. You think that'll help? One can hope, I added. We gotta try. We were escorted to the furthest corner of the lot, right under a broken streetlight. We stood there quietly for a moment, trying to discern if there were any sounds coming from inside. As far as we could tell, there wasn't. Greg wasn't about to let this slide, though. We need to check it out, he said. If this is Stuart's, there's gotta be something in there. I can't let you do that, said the attendant. Wouldn't be proper. I rolled my eyes at him. How about if I happened to drop, say, 100? Wouldn't that make it more plausible that the lock was already broken by the time you got here? Make it 200. I did. We cracked the lock and slid the door open. The attendant wandered off, making sure that no one came to look. The less he knew, the better. It made it easier to feign ignorance. So the lock fell off and we got to work. At first, I didn't know what we were looking at. It was a storage unit, sure, but something didn't seem right. There was this large box in the middle of the room lined with felt and pillows. It looked like something that a big dog might sleep in. There were racks of hand-me-down clothes, probably from a Goodwill or donated by some charitable soul. I could tell that it was Stuart's. I had seen him wear them. This explained the smell. You think he lives out of here? Greg asked as he went through a box in the corner. Maybe, I said. I think the lock can open from the inside. Nowhere to sleep, though. Well, maybe the box. He couldn't fit in there. I looked back at it. Maybe he could if he rolled into a fetal position. But who slept like that? There wasn't much in that unit. Clothes, a box, some shoes, and a couple of old books. Literary classics. Dostoevsky, Dumas, Bronte, big names. The trail seemed to end there until I looked a little closer. They're library books, I said, checking the back. This one was checked out last week. It's something. Maybe they know him. Maybe that's his shitty job, I asked. You ever figured out what he actually does? No idea, Greg admitted. Just sounds like any other job to me. It was a long shot, but we headed for the library. It was still open, but not for long. By the time we reached the front doors, I could see a librarian about to lock them. I managed to get the door open just in time as Greg came up the stairs panting. The librarian looked like she didn't know what to think. This was probably the most eventful thing to happen all day. Her surprised eyes looked even bigger from behind her large glasses. Excuse me, I said. Sorry, we're looking for someone. You know, a skinny man about this tall comes in here once or twice a week. He has this thing where he snaps his fingers when he's nervous. Do you know him? She looked us over, shaking her head. Sorry, we're about to close. You'll have to come back tomorrow. It's important, Greg added. I'm sorry, but it can't wait. And I'm sorry, but I don't know who you're talking about. Now, if you wouldn't mind. I let the door go as she looked us over one final time. She shook her head and closed the door. And then her fingers snapped. It was so unexpected, I think it surprised her too. The same snap, and just like Stuart. Her face shifted instantly, like a deer staring down a 12-wheeler. She had the keys in the lock but hadn't turned them yet. I looked at Greg and he just went with it. He pulled the door open before she could turn the key. The door flew open as she backed away, snapping her fingers again. I'm calling the cops. You can't be in here. Why did you do that? I asked, pointing at her hand. Why'd you snap your fingers like that? I don't know what you're talking about. She did it again. Greg fanned out to the left while I went straight ahead. Unless she bolted for the back, she was trapped. Our footsteps echoed off the walls and our shadows crawled up the cheap marble pillars. The overhead lights were already off, making every step into the library darker than the last. How do you know him? I asked. What is this? I don't know what you're talking about. I heard it again. Snap, snap. But this time, she wasn't the one doing it. I held up a hand, silently asking Greg to stop. He did. The librarian backed away as we stopped to listen. All through the winding corridors ahead, we could hear it. Snapping, that same sound in different directions. 3, maybe 4 people. Footsteps coming up and down the stairs in the back. Someone running. The librarian took off. I was about to follow when Greg shook his head, backing away. We walked all the way back to the front door. Hold on, I'm gonna go get something. He hurried outside, asking me to hold the door. The librarian had dropped her keys, so I snagged them and put them in my pocket. We didn't have much time, but something told me she wasn't about to call the cops on us. There was something going on. Greg rushed to his car and came back with a flashlight and a handgun. He took the gun, I took the flashlight. We went further inside, trying to navigate with a single beam of light. A couple of doors had been locked, but I had the keys to get through. It took some time to find the right one, though. Every now and then we could hear something moving, followed by the occasional snapping. I thought about calling for help, but I didn't know who to call or what to say. You can't call the cops on somebody for snapping their fingers, especially when you're the one doing the breaking and entering. We came to a staircase. There were clearly people above us. Whispers somewhere in the distance, some a little deeper, some a little lighter. I caught the occasional word. Looking, something something. Threat, something something. Curious, something. Greg looked up, keeping his gun at his side. I shone the flashlight up the stairs, hearing someone further up. It almost seemed like they were provoking us, daring us to chase them. The friendly posters on the walls asked visitors to visit their website or come by on special occasions. There was this one poster of a vibrant blue sunflower, asking guests to tell me your story, an invitation to their amateur writing circle. We can't go up, I whispered to Greg. I'm not buying it. But they're up there, he whispered back. Yeah, but the stairs go down too. They're being too obvious about this. I got a bad feeling. All right, he nodded. Let's go down. Another locked door and we were on our way. The staircase leading downward wasn't meant for guests. It led to an old bomb shelter. We never went inside the shelter itself, but we saw the signs. Solid concrete walls, ceiling, and floor. The air was stale and the temperature dropped. You could tell that you were going deeper and deeper underground. We didn't know what we were looking for. I hadn't considered that Stuart might have accomplices. I mean, yes, there had been 3 masked men at the red light when Nicole went missing, but I figured they were just some thugs for hire. But now things were looking different. Could it be his family? Were they so invested in him? We followed the tunnels further in, moving past rumbling pipes and humming maintenance lights. As the tunnel started to branch off, we had to make a tough decision. We weren't about to split up, so we had to figure out where we were heading, and we had to make sure that we didn't just go in a circle. And Greg had one idea and I had another. But then we heard it again, not too far off, that familiar snapping. There was this one tunnel that didn't seem right. It was slightly longer and there was a tilt to it. You could spot a strand of dirt along the edge of the left-hand side, showing that it was, in fact, leaning. It went a bit up, a bit down, and there were cracks along the ceiling. The overhead lights didn't work, so we had to trust the flashlight more than ever. Greg went first, keeping the handgun ready. The tunnel took a sharp left to a pair of double doors. They were completely covered in rust, to the point where we didn't know if we could crack them open. There was no need for a key here. This thing was a two-man job just to budget. Fortunately, the tunnel was small enough that we could prop ourselves up against the wall and push with our legs. Even then, it was a tremendous effort just to get through the worst of it. But once we pushed past a certain threshold, the door gave way. There was a large underground hall. It looked like a sort of theater stage. Even with the flashlight, we couldn't make out most of the ceiling. It's like the light was swallowed. We heard the snapping again. It sounded smaller and closer to the ground. I swept the flashlight over a crowd of old folding chairs, all set up for an invisible audience of about 100 people, maybe more. My mouth was drier than the concrete walls, making my tongue rough against the roof of my mouth. I could taste the dust on my teeth as I begged my heart to calm down. There was something further down on the floor. I pointed it out to Greg. It looked like a wooden doll. It was about 2 foot tall and had this completely neutral facade. No clothes and no facial features, just a simple wooden doll. Something that you might spot in an art class to practice poses. Looking a little closer, I could see these thin metal wires wrapped around its joints, reaching far up into the ceiling. One of the wires moved a little, making the doll raise an arm. As it did, the wire shifted. It was poorly tied and got stuck at a weird angle. So when the wire tightened, the joint corrected itself, making a snapping noise. Snap, snap. It moved, albeit just a little. It turned to us. I kept my light on it and Greg had his gun ready. I could hear his breathing getting louder as he mumbled something under his breath. The doll made a move as if reaching for something and then moved his arm back again, imitating the movement of pulling something heavy. And as it did, we heard the double doors grind open. Greg swung around, pointing his gun up. More than a dozen people silently crowded into the hall, dead-eyed, unblinking, and mechanical. None of them seemed to care that we were armed. With each that entered, I would hear the occasional snapping, both from them, the doll, and from other things in the dark. I had never seen these people before. Some young, some old, all varied and unique in different ways. They all had this look of a person who could be typecast in a movie or a commercial. The friendly neighbor, the kind receptionist, the clever middle schooler. "Stop," Greg mumbled. "You all stop right there and you tell us what the hell's going on." I didn't interrupt. I wanted to know too. Greg wasn't putting down his weapon and the strangers weren't backing down. They weren't advancing either. For a moment they just stood there as if considering something. I heard a snapping somewhere up in the dark of the ceiling. Then one of the strangers stepped out of the pack, a middle-aged woman. She had this completely neutral expression with her arms firmly folded at her side. She snapped her fingers as she walked a couple of steps down the stairs. Then, as if remembering that she was a person, she relaxed into natural movement. Something breathed life into her. Her arms relaxed as she raised a cigarette to her lips. "You boys aren't supposed to be down here. Are you lost?" "I know damn well we ain't," I said, my fingers cramping around the flashlight. "What'd you do with Nicole?" Oh, Nicole, I don't know any Nicoles. What are you on about? I looked back at the doll. It was mimicking her movements, and looking up into the ceiling, following the wires, I could hear something else. A voice, talking. I moved up next to Greg, poking him in the side. We looked up. A wheezing voice like someone trying to scream through a whisper. It was talking, but not to us, not directly. And Sandra tried to explain. No, not explain, convince. A breath later, the woman with the cigarette continued speaking. I think it'd be best for everyone if you just put that thing down, she said, nodding at Greg's gun. That won't solve anything. Yes, convince, the voice continued. She tried to make them at ease. Greg and I looked at one another. He was panting like a dog after a long run. I hadn't even noticed that I was too. I could see far more than a dozen people by the door now, and most had fanned out along the far wall. But our focus was up at the darkness covering the ceiling, the dark that not even our flashlight could pierce. She should try to use her womanly ways, the voice narrated. But she hadn't been feeling good about herself, not since the divorce. The doll swung out an arm and the woman followed. The wire wrapped around the doll's arm at a bad angle caused another snap. It translated into a couple more finger snaps from the woman. Look, she said, I know this is confusing. We can walk out of here together and go through this in greater detail. I know you have questions and I'd like to be the one to answer them. Greg aimed his gun at her. Enough. That caused a stir. A couple of wires rattled, sending a shiver through the crowd of people. They themselves didn't seem to have any wires attached. They were simply mimicking the movement of the doll. Or maybe there were several dolls. There were more wires overhead leading to other rooms and down other tunnels. You hear it too, I whispered to Greg. Yeah, he nodded. It's up there. Oh, the simple-minded buffoons rallied behind their dying light, the voice croaked, praying that the narrator would take pity, that he would tell their story. There was a gasp and a snarl. A large glob of fluid dripped into a viscous water balloon. It smacked down on a folding chair, sending it reeling to the floor with a flip. No, that he would grant them purpose, that he would give them meaning. I blinked. Using the flashlight, I followed the edges of the wall upward. It dawned on me that I wasn't looking at an impossible darkness. There was something up there. It was a physical thing. Something darker than night covering the entire ceiling. I could see cracks in the concrete where it had pushed into the walls, anchoring itself to the ceiling. I could see movement like a shadow in a pond, or eyes moving under a closed eyelid. They pondered his magnificence, the voice continued, his boundless magnitude. I kept my head down looking at the strangers. The woman with the cigarette seemed bored, if anything. I pulled on Greg's shirt, urging him to come along as we moved further back. There was a side door near the stage, leading us further in. The backstage area was filled with debris. Part of the wall had collapsed, burying 3 bookshelves in dust and dirt. The air was so still that I could taste it all the way into my lungs. The ceiling there was equally dark, but much lower. If I had a long enough stick, I could poke it. There were tables filled with wood scraps and tools. I could see spools of metal wires along with piles and piles of notes and pencils. The ground had almost as many pencil shavings as it had dust and concrete. What the hell is that? Greg whispered, pointing at a table at the far end of the room. I thought it was a life-sized mannequin. I could see each piece, clearly separated and cleaned. It had some texture to it though. Looking closer, I could see why. It wasn't a mannequin. There was a man on the table, each piece of him separated, drained of blood and cleaned. Metal wires had been attached between each piece. They just needed to be tightened. They were assembling a person. Greg checked the notes on the side as I struggled to keep my dinner down. I don't know what's worse, the sight or the lack of smell. It's like it wasn't even a person anymore. It's like it's a script, said Greg. A story. This is like a character in a story. A play. The ceiling rumbled as something moved. The voice was closer now, much closer. The curious creatures marveled over the brilliance of the script. Okay, what is that? Greg said. What is that? The angry man questioned the narrator, asking questions whose answers he was not entitled to. No, I'm not going to. Something came down like a pillar of dark, like a giant crushing a bug with the tip of his finger. It came down on Greg, something the size of a log, and pushed him to the ground. In a second, it cracked his spine and ribcage like a plump berry, and then lifted him up. He didn't even have time to finish his sentence. There was just the painful exhale before he was unceremoniously flung into nothing. Of course, the narrator would find use for the angry man. Another story to tell. No, a tale to weave. Yes. It was just me, my flashlight, and a tide of calmly encroaching strangers. I turned to the notes by the table, trying to get an idea of what to do. My fingers wouldn't stop shaking. The scared man admired the craftsmanship. The voice continued. He wondered how a being this radiant could have escaped his notice for so long. It was all stories. Something was telling stories, using people like marionettes. The way it spoke, the way it wrote, it was obsessed. I had to try something, and if I played my cards right, maybe I could get some answers as I did. The scared man, I started. The scared man was too stupid to see what had become of Stuart and his darling girl. He prayed that the magnificent creature would tell him. There was a low growl, like a sinister purr. The magnificent creature pondered. It said that maybe the scared man hadn't considered Stuart a story told. Perhaps it was a tale so naturally perfected that it was mistaken for truth. So Stuart had been controlled by this thing, a story. That explained the snapping. And the darling girl, the one he was meant to court, she waited for his approval. My heart sank into my stomach. For Nicole, for Greg, for me. I was so out of my league that I couldn't even fathom it. In the back, I saw it pick up one of the strangers as casually as a child would pick up a toy. It disappeared into the darkness, just like Greg. You can't just take people, I said. You can't make them into something they're not. The scared man forgot his place. The narrator grew disinterested in his mewling. The ceiling roiled like waves on the ocean. A hand holding a gun dropped to the floor, bloodless, and then a foot. This wasn't working. I couldn't reason with it, and one wrong step would mean death. I took a deep breath, forcing my tongue back, and cleared my throat. The scared man knew the narrator was too clever to make a common mistake, I said. He would not possibly present his audience with such a banal story. The strangers tilted their heads in unison, like a dog trying to understand its owner's words. Stuart wasn't meant to end up with Nicole, I continued. Of course, the brilliant narrator knew this. He had played on our expectations. No, Stuart's story was one of tragedy, not romance. Yes. Something moved again. One of the strangers picked up a note from a table, writing frantically on the back. Yes, subversion. One by one, the strangers began to laugh. The same laugh from a dozen different mouths, all with the same cadence but different tunes. Yes, the narrator continued. The scared man was right. Stuart's story was not one of romance, but one of tragedy. He had trusted in his best friend, only to lose the love of his life. He would wander the streets, doomed to never find safe harbor for his bleeding heart. A few strangers started to write it down. The metal wires rattled, making them shake with excitement, like a kid who can't wait to run. I could hear more rattling overhead as little pieces would drop to the floor. A shoe, a watch, a hand. Meanwhile, I slipped into a side door. In a way, I wish I hadn't. There were people sitting on chairs with their heads slumped over. Men, women, children. All of them had blank papers ahead of them, neatly stacked and ready to be written. And in the very front was one that I recognized. Nicole. I kneeled in front of her, checking her pulse. Her hands were cold. She wasn't breathing. And what of dear Nicole? The voice continued. What fate would the narrator grant her? She was dead. There was no warmth, no pulse, no breath. She was held up by some unnatural force. Perhaps she would become another, the voice said. Perhaps she would move, see the world. I grabbed her hands and laid my head against her knuckles. As I did, one of the wires holding her together twanged, making her finger go snap. It was too late and it hadn't even been a day. Perhaps, I cried. Perhaps the scared man could take her home. Maybe you could make things right somehow. I brushed some hair out of her eyes, and as I did, they opened. Yes, the narrator wheezed. Perhaps he could. Nicole and I left that place together. It took her some time to adjust, but her legs straightened out well enough. She didn't say anything, but I could hear her thoughts narrated through the thing above. Oh, how lucky she was, it laughed. She wouldn't know she had been graced with the touch of death. She'd remember it all as a bad dream, a bump in the night from which her darling dearest had woken her. Its laugh haunted me all the way out of the library. It wasn't a sound of joy. It was a practiced muscle movement, like the exhale of a sniffling beast. But we walked out of there, down the stairs, and back to Greg's car. I kicked the tires, screaming in frustration. As I did, a pair of keys tumbled down the stairs behind me. The angry man would see his friend soon, a stranger said, peering down from the library doors, and all would be well. Another day would come. Nicole would wake up, stretch, yawn, and go to brush her teeth. She would tell me about this crazy dream she had. We would have to explain to the police that she was fine, that it was all a misunderstanding. And she was fine, I suppose. Except for when she grabbed her coat. Her hand got snagged in her pocket, and as she turned her wrist, her fingers snapped. Snap, snap. And Greg made it home, albeit a bit later than he ought to. He seems fine as well. For some reason, he's picked up a couple of new interests, like he wants to live a new life, like someone is telling a different story than the one that he had. But in so many ways, he's still Greg, except for the occasional snapping of his fingers. In my heart of hearts, I know this isn't real. I know they're not who they look to be, and I know it's not their words that I'm listening to. But I'm okay with being lied to. I'll never say it out loud, but if this is just escapism, I'm okay with running far, far away, as long as Nicole is there. And Stuart, well, as far as I know, he still makes his way across town on the weekends. He's seen at dive bars and cheap nightclubs, trying his best to make a good impression. And of course he fails, as he was meant to. And as he snaps his fingers, I don't think he knows how deep his tragedy trails. Sometimes I snap my fingers too. I do it just for fun. I can choose to do it unlike them. But sometimes I have to ask myself if that's what they're telling themselves too. If we're doing the same thing, does the reason really matter? I've never dared to go back there. I don't know what would happen. I don't even know if Nicole is actually feeling anything, or if she's just a story being told. A blank puppet playing a part. You can read as many words as you want, but you can never read a soul. And as I lay down to sleep at night, I hold her close, and I wonder if you can truly love a story rather than a person. There's no free will here. Can it still mean something? I've thought about it for months at this point. I've talked about it, written about it, and I even thought about going back to see the narrator. I didn't, of course. I'm many things, but I'm not willing to hand over my life. And after all this time and pondering and anxious grieving, I have only one thing to say. I just don't know. Today's episode is sponsored by Cornbread Hemp. Have you been looking for a natural way to relieve aches and discomfort? The CBD gummies from Cornbread Hemp are formulated to work with your body, not against it. I'm still fairly young, but as I've gotten older, I've been feeling a lot more aches and pains that seem to pop up. But since taking some gummies from Cornbread Hemp, that discomfort is much more manageable. Cornbread Hemp's CBD gummies are made to help you feel better, whether it's stress, discomfort, or just needing a little relaxation. They only use the best part of the hemp plant, the flower, for the purest and most potent CBD. Right now, Creepscast listeners can save 30% on their first order. Just head to cornbreadhemp.com/MrCreeps and use code MrCreeps at checkout. That's cornbreadhemp.com/MrCreeps and use code MrCreeps. My grandfather passed away while shaving. I always wondered how far he had gotten into the process. He collapsed and suffered a severe concussion on the sink. The head injury did not end at all, as he was amidst an already fatal heart attack. The day before the funeral, his widow Cameron asked me to step into a room in the main foyer of his manor. I never realized how wealthy Grandpa was until I saw his home. The place had creeks, shrubbery, mazes, and levels. Rumor had it that he was a savvy investor, although into what was a mystery to me for years. I found out that he had been an early financier of a cigar company that had peaked in sales 2 decades prior. He had managed to get out of the market before it collapsed. Cameron and I sat down in a room with an oval oak table that looked out at a lake. She reached into her pocket and unfolded a map with a circle drawn in red marker around the top of the left corner. "We need to talk about your inheritance," she said. "I am the executor. I have all the appropriate documents to back up my claims here today, should you have any questions. James always thought that you had potential, but he was afraid. He did not want to ruin any legacy that you may have by giving you too much. He did not want to spoil you before you could make something of yourself. Based on what I've heard about the construction company that you run, you're doing just fine. When I die, this house is going to your sister. I'm sorry to say that you were not in line to take this piece of property or any of its belongings. He did give you land, though." I blinked. "Is it the golf course out back?" "No. He recalled with a fondness how when you were younger you would play with your best friend, I could not recall their name, in the desolation wilderness of the mountains. He said that you built a fort out there that the two of you loved. He purchased it out of pure sentimentality and gave it to you. He wanted to reward you with something that you could build on. It's fenced off, so you should not have any problems finding it with these printed coordinates. I gave a nod and placed the map in my shirt pocket. One last question, I said before we exited the room. May I ask what my parents have gotten? Yes, his board game collection. I see. How many of those did he own? One. The next few days passed in a blur. The memorial was as lavish as it could get. An entire banquet team fed us. A full-fledged orchestra belted out music. His coffin lowered into the ground with his favorite classical music surrounding him. Later that night in my hotel room, I sat with a bottle of Bushmill on the nightstand. I found myself growing resentful. My sister had gotten a house worth millions of dollars, whereas I was handed a patch of dirt. I would have to sink money and labor into it to make something valuable. My childhood images of playing in that area were not as strong as others. They became eclipsed by the yelling from my parents when I got back home. They interrogated me about where I had been. Dad particularly took issue with me not giving my whereabouts. He threatened to let the dog pee in my bed and stated that he would make me sleep in it. I could bring back the times when Adeline and I had built a makeshift house out of the tree branches. We had strung them together with fabric that we had cut from our backpacks. Adeline would die in a car accident on Interstate 80 when she was 20 years old. I repressed my emotions towards those times. I could not remember if I enjoyed those outdoor adventures. They may have been chores completed to feel less alone. I called Cameron the next day and asked her if she knew what the lot was worth. I do, she said. It's priceless. The barrier around the woodland that I was now the sole owner of seemed new. Harsh weather had not yet tainted it. There was not any graffiti or warped entry points from trespassers. The wall was not made of chain metal but obsidian. This left me scratching my head. How much it must have cost to export, let alone have a group of laborers put that much time into it. It left me astonished. I had stalled on visiting the place. I could not quite place why I made this deliberate procrastination. I had this indeterminable feeling to not let my presence be known there. Cameron had mailed me a key, and it was an older rusted style kind, like it may have once belonged to a P.O. box from the 70s. I searched around the perimeter for the front door. I came across a very narrow door with 2 indentations on either side of it. There were symbols on either side of the threshold. They resembled a country's flag with squared shapes. Angled lines and unrecognizable emblems decorated them. I turned the key and stepped into the acreage which now belonged to me. My boots crunched on gray and yellowed leaves. I made my way past an entangled and knotted mess of pines overlapped by time and nature. There was no trail nor any walkways, only small clearings. I stepped on shrubs torn apart by the wind. It only took me about 10 minutes of exploration to find the fort that Adeline and I had built. It stood there, thinner than I had remembered. Its wooden structure is so much frailer than back then. What we had manifested with our hands now had a blanket of moss around it. The shape of it went from a dome-like place of sturdiness in our youth to a horizontal edifice ready to buckle. I peered into the only fissure that one could slide their body through, shone a pen light in, and saw a man there. He was asleep in a fetal position. What was most uncanny of all was how there was a symbol surrounding him, outlined in red chalk or dust. The illustration was identical to what I had seen on the trees in the first passage. The man woke up and he stared at me. He gave me an awkward smile rather than a threatening one, which perturbed me even further. "You can't be here," I said. "This is my land. Don't make me call the police." He's out here." "Who are you talking about?" "A hunter. He doesn't prey on deer. He searches for people like you and me." After another advisement, the man left. I agreed to give him time to pack up his belongings. In reality, I didn't have any weapons on me, but I kept my hand in my waistband to make him think that I could be carrying one. Once he was past the gate, I breathed a deep sigh of relief and looked around once again at the place. I went back into the fort and destroyed the crimson sign by blowing on the lines of dust until they had scattered. I went to my hotel room that night, which was only 4 miles away from my piece of acreage. I planned on revisiting it in the morning. Chronic insomnia befell me. I tossed and turned, even with the desperate elixir of a highball whiskey to try to get me to pass out. And by the time that dawn arrived, I decided to go back to the fort. This time, I brought a large knife. I noticed something burning an unnatural color through the pines. I ducked down and I inched closer to it. I hoped that it was a flashlight used by early rising hitchhikers. But what I saw left me in a state of shock. He stood 100 feet away and carried a rifle slung over his front. The man stood the same height as me. The outfit that he wore was unlike anything that I would have expected from someone in the woods. His suit had tubes wrapped around it. Each one emanated the same verdant tinge. Even the clouds in the distance behind him possessed a hue of greenish effervescence. A helmet covered his face. It was not the circular type of head protection for motorcyclists, but square-shaped. The mouth was a straight bar of emerald neon. He saw me. A sense of unrelenting terror overcame me. For a second, I would have sworn that I saw his elbow lift just a bit. It was as if he was about to aim at me. But he second-guessed the action. He then sprinted in the opposite direction before I could take a picture. Later in the day, I walked up a steep incline lined with bark fragments and rocks. I saw some lights in the distance and I followed them. I found a small community with rows of cabins overlooking the lake. A pier sat isolated by the water, and there were gift shops closed for business. I laid eyes on a hotel that was 2 floors and had 8 windows altogether. I walked into the lobby. An old man met my gaze and stood up. "Do you have a reservation?" I told him that I did not. I made it clear that I was only passing through and that I had a few questions about the area, if he didn't mind answering them. He seemed reluctant. I smelled of sweat. I inquired about the best bait and tackle shops. I questioned him about which real estate companies owned the regional properties. Finally, I asked him what I wanted all along. Are there people who like to play dress-up out in the woods? I know that it may seem silly, but I know nowadays people like to do live-action role-playing and things like that. What is that? Nothing to worry about. I'm new to this area is all. I did live here before, but I was super young the first time around, and it wasn't year-round. Back then, it was only to visit my grandfather. My folks retired here. They live only about a half-hour away to this day. I'm wondering if the hunters around here have a specific dress code, one that makes them seem a little weird even. The old man's eyes grew wide. "Well," he said as he put a wad of chew in the side of his mouth, "there have been sightings of an unusual man. The police are looking for him last I heard. Rumors are that people have gone missing, but the local papers won't report on it. I don't know if there's a connection. May I ask, what did you do before coming here?" "Well, I was a salesman of sorts." "You may want to go back to that." By the time that I got back to my land, the sun had fell. I approached my fort. I had the craziest of yearnings, one that I could not believe I had felt for a moment. I wanted to sleep in it. Something about the idea was more than nostalgic. It was kind of comfort that I needed. It would be a strange trip down memory lane. It would take me back to those nights when my best friend and I would sneak out and not return home until daybreak. I remember the drifter. I shone my light on the place that I planned to slumber, and it seemed free of litter stains or any kind of man-made pollution. I laid down on it. I ran my fingers through the blades of grass. It occurred to me that they did not feel like they had sprung from the earth. They felt like confetti, plastic, and Monopoly money stuck in the ground. I sat up and clawed my fingers to the far edge between the makeshift wall and the turf. I grabbed a chunk of the corner and I yanked. I managed to roll up a piece of artificial earth, like the set design of a stage play. It was a carpet, made to look like nature. It was nothing more than an artificial and superficial landscape. What it revealed was a flat door. I retrieved my key and put it into the lock. It opened. I saw a wooden ladder there, splintered and uneven. I used my flashlight to try and see what was down there, and all I could see was another patch of dry dirt. I climbed down. The first thing that I saw in the right corner was the same suit that I had seen the man wearing the day before. It lay crumpled up on the floor, every bit as futuristic as my first impression. Only this time it was not lit up. Someone folded the outfit and placed it there in a meticulous manner. It had a cord that hooked up to an electrical plug tower. I turned around, stared at the wall, and felt my legs weaken. A desk was there with many items on it. I saw identification cards, pieces of jewelry, and articles of clothing. There were robes, handcuffs, blindfolds, mace, and photographs of the most horrifying nature. What were once human beings now existed as photographic depictions of butchery. At the bottom of the stack, I found one of a man posing next to the bodies. He had a cruel and mocking face, as though he delighted in the carnage. I recognized him. He was my father. Hi everyone. I'll preface this post by saying that I'm a pretty skeptical person, and I don't often visit these types of communities. That said, I've experienced something so ominous and unexplainable that I'm now seeking advice wherever I can find it. While I'm cynical about most stories here, I do find the responses are often sincere and helpful. That's what I need right now. Please read this with an open mind and let me know any thoughts that you may have. A few months ago, I moved to a small college town with the plan to finish my associates at a community college before transferring into the university. I found a room on Craigslist in a house shared with one other occupant. My new roommate, Joe, was a reclusive stoner type. As I got to know him, I learned he was an enthusiastic believer in conspiracy theories and supernatural occurrences. We would often share a joint while he told me about hauntings, black holes passing through the earth, chemtrails, and that sort of stuff. I would listen and humor him, but I considered it to be mostly nonsense. One day, he showed me an online discussion where several people had reported a similar experience. They recalled nights when an ice cream truck had driven through their neighborhoods playing a strange and discordant jingle. It would come very late when the streets were empty. Those who spotted the truck from the windows recalled feeling very afraid, and the eerie song was said to have caused recurring nightmares. The community had dubbed them Midnight Ice Cream Trucks, abbreviated as MICTs. The reports came from several locations within the United States, and one user had made a graph which linked the sightings to areas with unusually high numbers of missing persons. I responded with my usual skepticism, but Joel insisted on showing me one more thing, a link to a sound file. It was supposedly the jingle that the ice cream trucks would play when they drove about. The tune was strange and chaotic, with a churning rhythm and frantic melody that didn't seem to make any musical sense. It also seemed that there were other sounds behind the notes that couldn't quite be deciphered. I'll admit it gave me a slightly uneasy feeling, which also made me feel stupid for getting sucked into it. I told Joel that, like other such reports, these were extraordinary claims with very little evidence. The following day, I found the jingle from the recording had gotten stuck in my head. Despite having only heard it for a few seconds, it would come into my mind frequently during periods of silence. I wondered if the strange tune had been deliberately engineered to have this type of earworm effect. Perhaps it had been produced as an advanced hoax, or a viral marketing campaign. If so, it was very effective. I soon began to experience instances where I actually heard the jingle. The first time it happened, I was in the car listening to the radio. Without warning, the discordant tune came on. My heart skipped a beat before I realized that I was just hearing the intro to Wouldn't It Be Nice by the Beach Boys, which has a similar chime-in music box style to it. I felt very stupid but also conflicted. I could have sworn I'd heard the jingle briefly, but it was much more plausible that I had just imagined it. At least it seemed that way until the same thing occurred 3 more times. I heard the jingle when turning on the TV, in the background at the 7-Eleven, and from the stereo of a passing car. The thing is, it never lasted long enough to be certain I had truly heard it. After 2 days of this, I was feeling legitimately bothered and I wanted an explanation. Could the tune have been a part of a radio single and I'd only recognized the one segment? Something from a movie soundtrack or a commercial? It seemed doubtful. The sound was unharmonious and barely even resembled music. The possibility that I was hallucinating was a real concern. Was I suffering a decline in mental health? I would have considered school stress a factor, but spring break had just started, so this was also unlikely. I couldn't think of any root cause beyond the sound clip itself. Skeptical as I was of the Midnight Ice Cream Truck story, the audio recording seemed to have messed with my head. I began keeping my earbuds in during times of quiet, using music to keep the jingle out of my thoughts. This was frankly embarrassing. I hope to shake this condition without having to explain it to anyone else. That night, I heard the song outside my house at around 2 in the morning. Joel had left town to visit his parents and I had the place to myself for 5 days. It was hot out, so I left my bedroom window open. I was watching Netflix and starting to doze off when the jingle came drifting in through my window. My eyes shot open. I waited for the tune to resolve into something else as it had before, but it persisted. In disbelief, I muted my laptop and I walked to the window. The streets were dark and empty. The music echoed up from what seemed like a few blocks away. I watched the streets intently, waiting to see if the source of the jingle would come into view. The music gradually grew distant until it could no longer be heard. I stood there for a long time afterward, just in a nervous daze. What the hell was happening? Was there any possibility it could have been some other sound, which my paranoid imagination had perceived as the jingle? Could Joel have staged this as some elaborate prank? He seemed too lazy and too serious about his theories to have put so much effort into a practical joke. Even so, I decided to call him the next day. I was too shaken up to sleep, so I opened my laptop and I found the discussion thread on the ice cream trucks that Joel had showed me. I scrolled through, looking for anything useful. There were varying theories on the origins and the intent of the midnight ice cream trucks. Most agreed that a large part of their purpose was spreading the song itself. Some thought that they were part of a government mind control experiment. Others believed that they were camouflaged alien vehicles, using the song to condition our brains for unknown nefarious purposes. One user theorized they were unmanned vehicles created as part of some experimental marketing strategy. The midnight ice cream trucks may have never been properly shut down when the operation had ended, which left them aimlessly roaming throughout the country forever. The most outlandish theories stated they were sent from the future, using this song to inject messages and warnings into our dreams. I grew exasperated from the reading. It was all too ridiculous to be taken seriously. Whether the reports were sincere or not, these explanations were absurd and unfounded. In a last-ditch effort at some worthwhile information, I found the user who had uploaded the audio file and I clicked his profile. Sloan93. It was the same person who had posted the graph of disappearances. I hastily created an account and I sent a private message. Hey there, had some questions about the midnight ice cream truck stuff. I would love a chance to chat and hit me up if you got some time, or if you have any other advice with dealing with them. Thanks. I called Joel the next morning. He acted so normal and nonchalant that I soon dismissed the idea of a prank. When I reluctantly told him of the incident, he sounded almost exuberant. No way, for real? That's crazy, dude. I told you it was real. I asked if the jingle had ever been stuck in his head. He said that it had been for a while, but after playing it for me and hearing it a second time, he gradually stopped thinking about it. That actually made a lot of sense. Sometimes annoying pop songs that got lodged in your brain could be shaken loose by giving them a second listen. I thanked Joel for the talk and he told me to be careful. His voice sounded cheerful. He lived for this stuff and probably even wanted it to be real. I had begun to regret that I had ever humored his bizarre passion. Back on my laptop, I found the audio link. I mentally prepared myself, but hearing the sound still startled me. The melody seemed more jarring and unsettling than I had remembered. As it looped over and over, I strained to hear the faint noises in the background. They seemed more pronounced when I had focused on them. There was a wet, squishy noise, and if I had listened very carefully, something that resembled a low, croaking voice. The longer I listened, the more it seemed I could almost tell what it was saying. I lurched backwards in my chair as a pop-up blinked onto my screen. I hate ads. I left to get groceries and I saw my neighbor in her driveway. I asked if she had heard anything odd the night before and she said no, and she asked why. I said that it was probably just raccoons in the trash. I was not about to explain this absurdity to her. I got my groceries and I stopped at Taco Bell for lunch. As I ate, it dawned on me that the jingle was no longer stuck in my head. Thank God. On my phone, I checked the personal message that I had sent out yesterday. Sloan93 had responded. Hey there, glad you got in touch. I can chat tomorrow anytime after 11 a.m. Eastern. If you've seen anything midnight ice cream truck related, then please avoid the topic entirely for now. Get off of this site and don't listen or read or talk about it to anyone. Just chill for a bit. Trust me on this, I'll fill you in later. I decided he probably wouldn't be much help. His warning sounded like more unhinged paranoia. Really, I just wanted to forget the song and be done with it. When I returned home, something was off about the house. The air inside felt warm and slightly moist. There was a faint smell of something sickly sweet, like rotting vegetation. I checked the oven and burners as well as the faucets in the kitchen and the bathroom. Everything was turned off. I checked the garbage and it was nearly empty. I told myself that it was just the spring weather, but an anxious knot had begun to form in my stomach. I opened the windows to the place to air it out. Up until now, I had been using my own skepticism to comfort me. Regardless of what I thought I heard, I hadn't witnessed anything irrefutably real about the midnight ice cream trucks. That changed when I finally saw one. I awoke with a start, disoriented. I had been having a nightmare, though I couldn't recall what about. As my mind cleared, I became aware that the jingle could be distantly heard. I jumped out of bed and I peered out of my window. Like the night prior, the source of the sound was still many blocks away, but this time I could hear that it was getting closer. I dreaded the possibility of actually encountering one of the rumored midnight ice cream trucks. Whatever was making the sound, I silently willed it to pass by unseen as it had before. What happened instead was that a dark shape emerged from around the corner, and it slowly rolled into the glow of the street lamp. It was white with the classic horn-shaped speaker on top. The side was plastered with faded pictures of popsicles and Dixie cups. There was something very abnormal about the shape. Unusual angles and corners. It had an almost old-fashioned aesthetic, like something out of the 1920s. As it neared the house, I remembered that I was standing directly in front of an open window. I felt a moment of panic and I ducked out of sight. Keeping my head low, I reached up to close the window. I crouched there as the jangling tune grew louder. I could hear the wetness and the low voices again. It seemed these sounds had not just been on the recording, but they were part of the jingle itself. I clenched my teeth and I waited for the music to pass by. But instead, the sound just abruptly stopped. Had the truck turned off its speaker and continued driving? I strained to hear an engine and I could detect nothing. There was silence. The truck must still be out there directly in front of my house. I considered what this meant. Had it stopped because it had seen me? Or had my house been its destination? Trying to stay calm, I considered what to do next. I could sneak out the back door without passing any windows and exit the yard through the back gate. I could go outside and confront whoever it was, perhaps finding a makeshift weapon first. I could retrieve my phone from the charger in the kitchen and call the police. All of these options I realized required going downstairs. Quietly and slowly, I left my room and I moved down the stairway. This put me in sight of the entry windows and I risked a glance. The truck was parked right out front, as I had thought. I reached the bottom of the stairs, keeping low. From the vantage point, I could be able to look straight into the driver's side window. I could gather a description to give the police. I inched my head forward until the truck was just barely within my view. My heart jumped as I saw the driver. They were sitting completely still, facing forward with their hands on the steering wheel. I squinted, trying to make out their facial features in the dim light. Their head appeared to be slightly elongated, like a ball of putty that had been stretched out. A small reflection of light across their nose and forehead suggested their skin was an abnormal texture, smooth and glossy. Was the driver wearing a mask? They sat so still I was almost convinced that it was some sort of mannequin. I decided that it did not matter. I wanted my phone. I inched myself along the front wall, ducking under the windows as I had passed. I cursed my own stupidity for leaving them all wide open. Holding my breath, I strained to stay alert for any noise from outside. There was a knock on the door. I froze. It was so surprising, I almost thought that I had imagined it. And then it came again. something about how normal it sounded terrified me. The knock was far too casual and polite for the circumstances. I crouched directly beneath the open window, and guessed that if I had moved my head up just a few inches, I would see whatever was standing on my porch, and it might see me. They knocked again, but this time it was a violent pounding. So forceful, it rattled the windows and sent a wall hanging clattering to the floor. Holding back a scream, I scrambled backwards towards the stairway, crab walking to stay low while keeping the door in sight. I reached the stairs and I stood up, looking out of the window. The truck was gone. I never heard it leave, but perhaps I had been too scared to notice. Had the driver left with it? It seemed like mere seconds ago they were pounding on my door, but perhaps my sense of time was distorted. I dashed back upstairs, returning to my bedroom window. The porch and street were empty. The neighborhood looked like it did every night. I realized just how pointless it was to call the police. My story was ludicrous. I doubt they would even send anybody to check up on it. My neighbors were unlikely to corroborate anything I said. I need some kind of evidence to really get them. My fear was beginning to give way to anger. I was being harassed and tormented in my own home, in the dead of night, and the only help available to me was the advice of internet whack jobs. This had to stop. I could get evidence. I went downstairs to the kitchen, moving swiftly and looking straight ahead. I grabbed my phone and I opened up the camera app, and then I tapped the button to begin recording video. I went from window to window, aiming the camera outward with shaking hands, but there was nothing unusual to see. I needed to check the porch and street. Gathering every ounce of courage and righteous anger I could manage, I opened the door and I stepped out. I aimed the camera up and down the empty streets. Everything was still. "Hello?" I called out and I waited. The silence was broken by a low, grunting croak. I jerked around, my phone held up in front of me. I couldn't see the source of the sound. "Who the hell is it?" I demanded, my voice becoming higher with fear. A long silence, and the noise came again. It sounded like speaking, but in a voice like none I'd ever heard. It resembled the sound of wood creaking, but in a very low register. The voice repeated itself, and this time, I could understand it. "We're up." I glanced up. There's an old cherry tree in my front yard which extends high above the house. It looked at first like a series of oddly shaped branches hung down. I saw one shoe and then another, and then a pant leg. These were not branches but legs and feet. My gaze followed them upward, and I finally understood what I was seeing. There were two figures sitting in the tree above me, nearly 30 feet off of the ground. They were perfectly still. Their warped, stretched out heads peered down at me through the dark. They began making a low, repetitive clucking noise. The sound could have indicated anything, but to me it resembled laughter. My vision swam. I was on the verge of fainting. I had instinctively backed through the doorway and was now inside again. I slammed the door shut and I collapsed on the stairway. I gulped lungfuls of air and I waited for whatever would happen next. Nothing did. I remained on the stairway, too scared to move or act, for almost an hour. I was not being pursued or attacked. The midnight ice cream trucks were real. I could no longer deny that, but I seemed I was safe for the time being. What I needed to do was leave this house and perhaps even this entire town. I could go back home, though I would have to explain the encounter to my dad and sister. I remembered the video that I had been recording. I might now have the evidence. I checked my pocket for the phone, knowing it wouldn't be there. I had almost certainly dropped it outside. I would have to go out in front if I wanted to leave the neighborhood, and daylight was still several hours away. Teeth clenched, I approached the entryway, I could barely bring myself to look out of the window. When I finally did, I saw that the cherry tree was empty. My phone was laying on the porch and I flung open the door and I ran out. I scooped up the phone and I continued straight to my car. I was physically and mentally exhausted and I needed a place to rest and get my bearings. I found a motel near a strip mall. The roads here were busy with bright street lamps and a 24/7 diner across the street. The midnight ice cream trucks could not come here without alerting others. I checked in and I sat down on the bed. I needed sleep, but first I wanted to check the video footage. I immediately noticed a problem. The video file was only 1 minute and 20 seconds long. I had run out of space long before stepping onto the porch. Furious, I threw my phone across the room. My evidence was gone. If I shared my experience with anyone, it would sound just as crazy as every other loony on the internet. I supposed it didn't matter. I could deal with weird looks. I could deal with keeping a secret. If I got away from this nightmare, I'd be okay. I'd return to the house in the daylight just long enough to pack before leaving for good. I'd be okay. I slept until 1 p.m. the next day, and I woke up hungry and anxious. I'd had nightmares again, unsurprisingly. I went to the diner next door and I ordered breakfast. While eating, I pulled up my phone and I messaged Addie Sloan 93. After the events of last night, it felt crucial that I follow up on our conversation from earlier. They got back to me a moment later, and we spoke about it for 10 minutes. Here are the chat logs from that discussion. Hey man, thank you so much for talking. I've seen some crazy things lately and I'm honestly scared shitless right now. So any help you might have would be great. It's a woman, but yeah, no problem. Just please avoid telling me anything that isn't really necessary. Only give me details I've directly asked for, okay? Sorry, woman, lol. Yeah, that's fine, but can I ask why? I'll get to that in a sec. First, have you actually seen these things, or just heard them? What's your first point of contact? Someone showed me a recording of the song and I started hearing it all over. And finally I saw the truck at my house. And then I actually saw the people from the truck and I heard them speaking. Oh wow, holy crap. It might actually be too late. Are the people moving yet, or are they more like statues? I think they move when I'm not looking. But yeah, when I see them, they're holding still. I don't know what you mean by too late or if they're moving yet. Can you please tell me what the hell is going on? I seriously just heard about this shit a few days ago. Okay, good. They don't move because their link to you is still too weak, and they still don't have enough control. The song is like a fishing hook that they send out, and when you listen to it, it's like they got a bite. They become aware of you and they start trying to strengthen the link. They'll poke at you and make you see and hear things. The more you respond, the wider their path gets, giving them more access to you. If you see in their bodies, it means they're pretty far along. Most people who reach this stage end up going missing. But what are they? I read all the theories on the boards, but there's so many, and they all conflict with each other. Boards are 90% dummies. Don't listen to them. Nobody knows what they really are, but I believe they're evil entities that kind of live on the outskirts of our reality. Spirits or demons or something extra dimensional, or whatever. It doesn't really matter because we know what they do and that they prey on people. But they need a link to see or take action in our world, so I think you can still lose them. Okay, please help though. How do I stop them from coming? You have to wait them out until they lose track of you or find another target. Every interaction you have with them gets them closer to you. This includes reacting to their stimuli in any way, or even thinking about them too much. You have to keep yourself busy and your mind occupied at all times. How could I actually even do that? That's on you. Use other stimuli to drown them out. Use sedatives to stay asleep. Stay in crowds of people. Try anything you can think of. You're way too close to not being around anymore. I know 2 people who have seen them and escaped, and that's how they did it. That's your best shot. What should I do if I try but it doesn't work? What if they come again anyway? Pretend you don't see them. Avoid acknowledging or interacting with them in any way. That's the only defense that I know of. Just having this conversation with you is unsafe, and I'm about to cut it off. Do you have any final questions? I don't know, I can't think of any now. But just please check your inbox later in case I need your help. Okay? Maybe, but no promises. I gotta prioritize my own safety, sorry. Good luck. So that was it. Perhaps the only person who truly understood my predicament was giving me the cold shoulder. I suppose our conversation was better than nothing. I would have laughed at her advice yesterday, but now it seemed very prudent. Crowds, sedatives, and stimuli. I needed to go home and pack before nightfall. I would want my laptop, my chargers, and my earbuds. A few things from the medicine cabinet, and some extra clothes. Everything else was expendable. I pulled back into my driveway around 3 p.m. The day was still bright and neighbors were out gardening. This felt like a safe time to be here. However, stepping inside, I almost gagged. The thick air and rotting smell had returned, and this time it was overpowering. If Addie Sloan 93's theory was correct, did that mean that these occurrences were, what, illusions? Manifestations? Were they affecting physical reality or just my perception of it? I realized I couldn't know without asking an outside party, and that would go against the instructions that I had been given. Ignore it. I got my charger from the kitchen and my toothbrush and meds from the bathroom. I entered my bedroom to collect clothes and electronic accessories. My laptop was still on and in sleep mode, so I went to shut it down. As the screen turned on, I saw that my browser was open to a familiar sound file. Just a moment before the jingle came through the speakers. Had I actually left that tab open? The jingle's insane melody had become almost physically painful to hear, and the background sounds were more pronounced than ever. A sick squishing noise followed by a creaking groan. It was definitely a voice. Again and again, looping endlessly. I slammed the laptop shut and I unplugged the cord. Should I have done that? Was that an interaction? I needed to leave and I glanced outside and to my horror, saw that the sky was growing dark. How could that be? My clock radio now read 6:28 p.m. Impossible. I had been home for over 3 hours. It barely felt like 10 minutes. I tried to remember how long I stood there listening to the jingle play on my laptop, and I realized that I couldn't quite recall it. I could still hear it playing in my head, and the raspy voice endlessly repeating itself. Of course, that was not what it was really saying. The words hadn't been random gibberish, just as the music hadn't been an arbitrary series of notes. That's not how these beings worked. Everything they did was a form of communication. That's how they established their links, by speaking to you. Your mind just needed time to sort out what they were actually saying. That sound seemed to have always been contained within the jingle, but now I was able to decipher the intended phrase. Your closet. My closet, which was closed. I knew I shouldn't open it. The problem was, I needed something in there. The closet is where I had hung my windbreaker, and in my windbreaker's pocket was my second keychain, in which I kept the key for my gas cap. The car had less than a quarter tank in it. If I was leaving town, I would need that key. Besides, if I avoided the closet in response to the jingle, wouldn't that be reacting to the entity's stimuli? The logic of my defense tactic was becoming hazy, and I was vaguely aware that I should be more frightened than I felt. Things were coming to a head. I regarded the clock again. 10:23 p.m. Time was constricting itself. I wondered how this scene would look to somebody outside, watching me through the window. Was I moving in slow motion? It occurred to me that Addie Sloan 93 may have gotten something wrong. What if the entities were not trying to enter our reality, but instead were dragging us into theirs? Perhaps I had already disappeared from the world I had come from, and I was now stuck in some unknown corner of existence. The terror of this thought stabbed me out of my trance. Grab the windbreaker and get out. Now. I opened the closet door and I choked. The smell was absolutely nauseating. As I reached in, I made the mistake of looking down. I knew that I shouldn't have. See, my closet has a panel in the floor that opened up to a crawl space beneath the house. I had opened it once when I had first moved in out of curiosity, but I had left it closed ever since. It was open now. Through the small rectangular hole, somebody was laying on their back staring straight up at me. Their head was like smooth dough stretched and pulled. Their features were blurry in the darkness, but I noticed their chin was moving up and down furiously. They were speaking. I could now hear the frantic stream of gibberish, the syllables coming so rapidly that they blended into a warbling drone. Suddenly, the figure's two arms shot straight up and began whipping back and forth in an almost mechanical rhythm, so fast that they became a blur. I tore out of the room, down the stairway, and out of the house. The street was empty, but I saw motion in my front yard and I turned my head. Figures were splayed out all over the yard, on their backs with their arms flying madly in the air, back and forth in an identical motion, their vibrating jaws all emitting the same chattering hum of half-formed syllables in frantic, garbled speech. Their voices joined together in a chorus that resembled a swarm of monstrous flies. The sound seemed to cut through my sanity. In desperation and fear, I screamed as loud as I could. The sound of my own howling startled me into action, and it drowned out the surrounding madness. I continued to scream as I ran to the car and I started the engine. Turning onto my street, I accelerated as fast as the vehicle would allow, blowing through stop signs and traffic lights. I continued screaming, only relenting for long enough to take a breath before screaming again. This kept my mind from wandering, kept my ears from hearing, and the blistering speed at which I was driving kept me intently focused. After 10 miles, I had not seen another vehicle. My gas gauge indicated that I was running empty. I couldn't slow down or even spare a moment of silence. If the entities overtook me now, it would be over. This was my final shot at escape. I screamed until my throat was raw. Abruptly, I saw traffic ahead. I was approaching an interstate and I merged into the leftmost lane and I looked around. The vehicles surrounding me were driven by regular men and women. I let my ragged throat rest and I listened. The hum of engines and the muffled music of nearby car stereos, the jingle of my own keys dangling from the ignition. They were normal sounds, the beautiful sounds of our world. I sobbed with relief. I didn't stop driving until my tank ran out of gas and then I hitched a ride to the bus station. To this date, this was my last encounter with the midnight ice cream trucks. I have not been back to my house or town ever since. I've reached the end of my story, and the part where I have to come clean up on my intentions. While the story is true, I did not actually come here seeking advice. I'm sure most of you have realized this by now. If you clicked the link and heard the song, please know that I am sorry. I hope that you can someday forgive me, as I had forgiven Addie Sloan for the torment that she inflicted on me. In her case and mine, trying to wait it out had become an endless, agonizing uncertainty. Knowing we might protect ourselves by creating new targets was a means of defense we simply couldn't ignore. In any case, I hope nothing comes of it. I hope they forget about us and go away. I hope you're able to look back on this at nothing but a spooky story. But in case it becomes something more, please remember that it's okay to scream. Your fear response is there to protect you, so don't shy away from it. Scream loudly and violently. And if the situation calls for it, scream now. Because if you fail to act in time, you may just end up screaming forever. It all started with a phone call. I picked up on the third ring.
Jesse.
Paul started, his voice cutting through the silence of the night and waking me from the deepest sleep that I had had in a while. I just checked on your cows and a couple of them slipped through a break in the fence. Rubbing a hand over my face, I blew out a frustrated sigh and peeked at the clock on my dresser. The red numbers glared back at me tauntingly. 11:32. Despite being absolutely exhausted, I knew my farmhand couldn't handle it all on his own, and these cows were my bread and butter. If I lost any more, I would be madder than a hornet's nest.
Jesse,
Paul questioned. You fall asleep on me, brother. I shook my head, more to convince myself than him, sat up in bed and threw off the covers. I heard you, I'm just real tired is all, but I'm up. A crackle settled over the phone before I heard Paul clear his throat and say,
Yeah, they've gone over yonder to the tree line. I'm sure we can get them rounded up though, and we'll get you back to bed here soon.
With a tug, I yanked on my boots and laced them up. Thanks, brother, I appreciate your help. Just let me get my bearings and I'll be there in 2 shakes. See you in a bit, he said, the phone disconnecting. Honestly, now that I thought about it, the fact that Paul was even out this late was strange in and of itself. I didn't know what he was doing out in the pasture at this time of the night, but I did know that it wasn't safe. For the past couple of weeks, cows have gone missing right and left, and I had felt increasingly helpless. Something had to give, and it wasn't going to be me. Whatever or whoever was doing this was going to pay for the chaos that they had caused one way or another, because there wasn't any way that I was just going to roll over and let it happen. With a glance in the mirror, I ran a hand through my hair, blew out a breath, and switched on my lamp. I threw on an old flannel and headed downstairs just in time to be caught by my little sister. Jesse, what are you doing up so late? She asked, her big brown eyes peering up at me from the living room couch. You know, I started, a small grin tugging at my lips. I should be asking you the exact same thing, young lady. With a huff, she held her nose in the air and looked down at me, a bowl of Captain Crunch in her hands. 16-year-olds don't need a bedtime. She paused and then pointed towards her bowl. And besides, I was famished. You can't cook worth a crap. Famished, I muttered, the word floating from my mouth on a sarcastic breath. I don't know why in the world you go around using words like famished, but my squirrel and dumplings beat a bowl of Captain Crunch any day, I quipped, my hand coming down to ruffle her hair. She scrunched up her nose, set down her bowl, and rolled her eyes before saying, You and I both know that's a lie. Suddenly noticing that I had my shoes on, she quirked a curious brow and said, Where are you headed this late at night? Booted feet trudging over to the door, I winced when I heard the floorboard squeak. I really needed to replace that. I'm heading out to the pasture. A couple of the cows got loose and Paul needs help rounding them up. I should be back before sunrise, and just make sure. I'll come help too, she retorted, already racing over to her room to track down her own boots. Ava, I shouted from the living room. Don't worry about it. I'm sure between Paul and I we'll do just fine. Despite my qualms, I watched as she came clomping out of her room, feet shoved into worn and weathered boots and her braids loose, baby hairs sticking out in every direction. With a shake of my head, I chuckled at her stubbornness, realizing this was just one battle that wasn't worth fighting. Stepping out into the cool night air, I waved her onward, unlocking my old pickup truck and shoving my key into the ignition. Ava plopped down on the seat next to me, her hands picking at a scab on her elbow. The old truck choked a couple of times before finally sputtering into life, and then we were speeding down the old dirt road, dust kicking up into the air in thin brown puffs. When we finally made it to the ranch though, Paul wasn't anywhere in sight. Only having a landline had its advantages and its disadvantages, and right now it was the latter. Maybe he had run back home to his old lady. She was as big as she was round. Her belly stretched out clear in front of her like an overly ripe watermelon. This was going to be their first child, and she was due any day now. Paul, of course, was increasingly paranoid that something would happen to her or she would need something when he wasn't around, so he never strayed too far from her side. Although I haven't ever married and had kids of my own, my worry was somewhat similar when Ava was out of my sight for too long, so I couldn't blame the man for running off if that was the issue. Shoving the thought aside, I made a mental note to call him about it later. "Jesse," Ava called, her voice cutting through the still of the night. She had already hopped out of the car and was halfway across the cow pasture, standing right smack dab in the middle of it. "Ava, it's darker than sin out here. I need you to stay close to me. There's no telling what's lurking out in these parts at this time of night." "Oh, come on, don't be a baby." Even in the dark, I could sense her sass, her tongue sticking out at me rebelliously as I fought a losing battle to not step on the countless cow patties littering the pasture. Somehow, in my sleep-deprived state, I had grabbed my nice pair of boots instead of my mud-crusted ones, caked in who knows what else. "Ava, I'm serious," I warned. "I already have to look for these cows, and the last thing I need to be is looking for you." I paused, my voice stern, but softened a little around the edges. "Listen, you came here to help, not hinder, you hear?" An exasperated sigh left her lips before she finally relented and shrugged her shoulders. "Fine, I'll stay close." I patted her shoulder and pointed towards the few heifers that were grazing along the tree line. "Listen, the faster we work together to get this done, the faster you can be back home eating your Captain Crunch." Strolling across the field with me, her steps fell in line with my own. 3 of hers for every 1 of mine. "It'll be soggy by then," she quipped. I punched her lightly on the shoulder, shooting her a grin. "Hey, I'll make it up to you by taking you to the Waffle House in town." Her eyes suddenly lit up at the offer before she grabbed my arm and practically dragged me along. "Deal," she said, a smile spreading across her features. A couple of hours later, and we both quickly realized that gathering the cows and mending the fence took a whole lot longer than we had anticipated. Wiping some sweat from her brow, Ava suddenly glanced over towards me and then back around at our surroundings before saying, "Did you hear that?" "Hear what? The cows mooing?" I nudged her shoulder playfully and then spoke up again. "Yeah, it's kind of what they do." She punched me in the side, narrowing her eyes, and said, "No, stupid, it sounds like a lady or something, like she's talking to someone." My eyes met hers, my face contorting into one of silent skepticism. "Ava, I don't hear a darn thing besides the wind blowing through the trees and those cows mooing way over yonder. Now help me pack up my toolbox so we can get the heck out of Dodge before you scare yourself even more." With a huff, she helped me load everything back into the toolbox before she stopped again. I eyed her, stopping what I was doing and folding my arms over my chest. "What is it this time?" I questioned, my brows raised expectantly. "There's no way you didn't hear that," she exclaimed, her movements animated as her hands flew up to express her concern. This time it sounded real deep and gruff, kind of like a man was talking. I brushed it off, pressing the toolbox closed and picking it up before turning to her and saying, "I think your imagination's just going a little haywire." Peeking a glance at my watch, I internally cringed when I noticed that it was about 2 o'clock. As I took a couple of steps across the pasture, though, I noticed that suddenly the night noises came to a standstill. I stopped in my tracks, looking over at Ava, and noticed her do the same. This time, I felt a strange tension in the air. The pasture's normal harmony of moos was suddenly quiet. The crickets from before it even died down, their music fading into an odd silence. It became very apparent that we were all alone, and something about that felt terribly uncomfortable. By the time that we had mended the fence, the cows had wandered far across the field, deciding to hunker down under some trees for the night. Fog crept over the lush grass, coating the pasture in an almost ethereal haze. Something about it was eerie, and it made me just uneasy enough to kick myself for forgetting to grab my gun off my nightstand. "Jesse," Ava whispered, breaking me from my silent observation, her voice silently wavering. I turned at my heel to face her, my eyes taking in her worried expression, her own eyes as wide as saucers. "Ava, what's over there?" she pointed, cutting me off, her fingers shaking like a leaf. Following her trajectory, I stilled. Every hair on my arm stood on end when my eyes connected with two more near the tree line. Ava looked like a deer caught in the headlights, her own arms sprinkled in goosebumps. The eyes glowed hauntingly, a sinister smirk fixing itself to the creature's face, a smile way too wide to be human, except for the fact that it appeared as if in some strange way it was. Despite this thing being shrouded in darkness, there was no mistaking the outline of a human-like form. I wrapped my hand around Ava's arm fast as lightning and began to hurry the both of us out of the field. "Ava," I whispered, "you gotta move faster, come on, you've gotta help me." My legs made quick strides across the pasture, but Ava was still struggling to keep up. I made a quick decision, grabbing her up and throwing her over my shoulder before jogging towards the truck. I threw the both of us inside, quickly locking the doors and peering out across the pasture, expecting to see those glowing eyes still fixed on the two of us. Except, there was nothing. Still shaken up, I shoved my key into the ignition of my old diesel truck, hoping and praying that it wouldn't give me any trouble this time. A shiver raced down my spine as time crawled by. Distressed, I waited for the orange glow on my instrument panel to fade, mirroring the unsettling memory of that creature's eyes, the way they gleamed from the depths of the woods, only proving to add to my ever-growing anxiety. When the engine roared to life, though, there was no relief. The turbo barely had a chance to awaken before I got the heck out of Dodge, barreling down the road, a spewing plume of rolling coal left in our wake, a frantic attempt to outpace the lurking fear behind me. "What was that?" Ava suddenly asked, her knees huddled up to her chest as her arms wrapped securely around them. With a quick scan of my surroundings, I looked in the rearview mirror and exhaled a sigh of relief when there was nothing but the trees and a cloud of dirt behind us. I honestly have no idea what that thing was, but I do know that I'm going to call Paul as soon as we get back to the house and get this all straightened out. My voice shook slightly, but I tried to mask it, clearing my throat and gripping the steering wheel instead. The last thing that I wanted was for Ava to know that I was scared out of my doggone mind. "Jesse," she said, her voice soft and quiet, hands picking at a loose string on her jeans. "It's okay to be scared." I knew she was only trying to comfort me, but one of us had to be strong, so I shook off my fear as best I could and reached out a hand to pat her knee. "I'm not scared," I replied, my voice smooth and even. "I'm just worried." The second that we pulled up to the house, though, that worry slowly morphed back into fear. Something familiar was lying on the front porch. Slamming the truck into park, I hopped out and ran up to it. There, splayed out across the wood, was a bloodied mass. A cow. I held back a gasp, trying and failing to steady my stomach as it bubbled and churned. Instead, I bent over and dry heaved, the smell infiltrating everything around me. Blood and guts squirmed and writhed with millions of maggots, the badly slaughtered heifer laying there with her black, glossy eyes staring up at the ceiling, tongue dangling from her mouth. Large lacerations covered her body, monstrous chunks missing from the abdominal area. It took all that I had not to vomit. The sound of the truck door rang out as Ava closed it, and before I could stop her, her feet were padding across the grass to stand beside me. I heard her gasp before she quickly reached towards her shirt, tugging it up over her nose to mask the horribly wretched smell. Covering my own nose with the sleeve of my flannel, I motioned for Ava to follow me inside. I needed to inspect the cabin, but I also wanted to keep her close. Together, the both of us carefully moved throughout each room until we were satisfied that we were safe. Once we both gave the okay, we plopped down on the couch and just stared at each other. Neither of us mentioned the cow still laying outside on the front porch, but I was certain that somehow we both knew how it got there. Exhaustion clung to us like a wet t-shirt, but it was apparent that the adrenaline coursing through our systems had us both working in overdrive. And that's when I heard it. The landline in the kitchen. It's gotta be Paul. I stood from the couch and hurried over to the phone, nearly tripping over my own feet as I answered it on the first ring. "Paul," I questioned, my voice a bit too loud, a bit too unrestrained and a whole lot of worried. "Where the heck are you, man?" Suddenly the line crackled and a voice came back over the speaker.
"Jesse, Paul's."
There was a pause, but the slight edge that the voice had was unmistakable. "Missy, is that you? Where's Paul?"
"Paul's."
Her voice wavered again before I heard the phone being snatched from her hand and another voice floated over the line, the tone both sinister and calm.
"I'm sorry, Jesse."
It crooned, its voice deep and smooth.
"Paul's not here right now. In fact, Paul was just getting in the way, so I simply had to."
The voice trailed off, the line crackling again. Fear coursed through me and I couldn't help but break out into a cold sweat, the realization finally dawning on me. This was the creature. Instead of following us home, it had run back to Paul's house. But why? "You," my voice shook. You didn't kill."
"Oh, but I did,"
the creature hissed. I could almost feel its grin widening at my unbridled disbelief.
"You see, I'll say it in a way that your poor human mind can comprehend. Missy here's got a bun in the oven."
The creature drew out and then he suddenly went quiet, giving me a second to let it all sink in. And when it finally did, I paled and nearly dropped the phone when it responded.
"And it doesn't belong to Paul."
Despite what some might tell you, it's not actually so bad to work in this field. Sure, some of the elderly can be difficult at times and, like any other job, this one has its stomach-churning moments. But most of them are sweethearts. All it takes is some compassion and patience to break through to them. So yeah, I mostly love this job. I wouldn't give it up if I could help it. The only part that I don't like are the occasional confessions from some of the patients. They say that people can feel their ends nearing, and after a few years of working this job, I've come to believe that. Some of them have no one else, no family or friends left, so they air their dirty laundry, so to say, in front of us nurses. Most of the time it's pretty mild stuff. Old Gregory had cheated on his wife in their 30s. Larry used to be into some hardcore stuff. Lisa stole from her company for a while. Stuff you don't necessarily expect, but that doesn't surprise you in hindsight. Other times it borders on disturbing. Jenkins had a bar fight and ran away, and to this day he's not sure if the other guy survived. Sasha had to get rid of her baby on her own, without telling her boyfriend at the time that she was even pregnant. Sierra abandoned her family, running away in the night to start a new life. And seeing the missing person posters ate her up inside. That's the kind of stuff that gets under my skin, but I can at least understand where they're coming from. I can sympathize even if I don't condone their actions. But then there are the monsters. The ones that have committed truly atrocious deeds, and their confessions keep me up at night. Julia, the sweetest old lady that you would ever meet, gaslit her husband into ending himself to cash out on his life insurance. Freddy helped burn an entire village back in the Vietnam War, basking in the flames and these screams of the dying. Sally did horrible things to her child growing up, to the point that it caused a myriad of developmental problems. Mind you, I haven't been there for myself for all those confessions. Us nurses tend to share, morbid as it might sound. Go ahead and judge if you want, but we didn't ask for those burdens to be placed on our shoulders, and we'll seek relief wherever we can find it. Most of the time it's just innocent gossip, the "you won't believe what Gus used to do when he was young" type. Other times there are tears and silent cries in the break room, stone-cold expressions and depressing atmosphere. Not a hint of levity to go around. But such is life in this field. Most of us have learned to live with it, and those who couldn't walked away. I myself am in the first camp, and I don't think last night will change my mind. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. You need some context in order to make heads or tails of this. It all started with Parker, and so I should too. He's a bitter old man. No way to sugarcoat it. A tough nut to crack. Rage and hatred for everyone and everything simmering under the surface at all times. He's the type of person that won't be satisfied until your parade is soaked to the bone in rain. He's been here since before I was hired, so the other nurses warned me about him from day one. God help you if you have to interact with him. He can ruin your entire week just by opening his mouth, they had told me. I didn't take them seriously, thinking that he couldn't be that bad. Spoiler alert, he was, but not in the ways that you would expect. He didn't get physically violent like some of the other elderly. He didn't fling crap and soaked diapers at us. He flung words, but he knew how to make them cut, and cut deep. Our first interaction happened when I had to check up on him and make sure that he took his medicine. It was a nice evening, and I found old man Parker in his room, lounging in his recliner. He faced towards the windows and back to the door, and he didn't bother to turn around and look at me when I had entered. "Good evening, Mr. Parker," I greeted. "Hey, fresh meat." He spat a response laced with spite. I gritted my teeth and tried to sound polite when I answered. "My name is Jessica, but—" "Fresh meat," he interrupted me. "You won't last a month, so I won't bother learning your name. Now why are you here, fresh meat?" I told him why, and he pointed at the empty pill bottle on the nightstand next to him. And then he returned to staring out the window at the sunset without another word, so I took my leave. That was how the first 3 weeks went by. I went over to his room for this or that. He made some snide remarks to insult me, and I held my tongue. It was clear that he didn't want anyone around, especially me. But I was never a quitter, and I wasn't about to bend the knee to some old fart with a vendetta against happiness itself. "You still here?" he had asked on the 4th week when I passed by his room to change his bedding. "My God, woman, you're about as smart as you are pretty." He was in his recliner again. Most of his evenings and nights were spent there. By day, he would be outside or in the common area, terrorizing everyone that he happened upon. But as soon as dusk had approached, he would retreat to his room and peer out the window until he fell asleep in the recliner. I ignored his remark, approaching the bed with a fresh set of sheets and pillowcases. "What? Did you swallow your tongue? Forgot how words work?" He kept pestering me. I took off the old sheet and discarded it on the floor, even though it wasn't all that dirty. "That wouldn't be a big surprise. Honestly, the only thing surprising to me is that you learned to speak in the first place. Now, I don't recommend doing what I did, reacting like I had. At that point, I should have thrown in the towel and walked away. But I didn't. After 2 weeks of him like that on the daily, I snapped. I threw the fresh sheets haphazardly on the bed and stomped over to his recliner. "Listen here, you shriveled up ballsack." I went off on him. "I don't know what your problem is, but I don't need this kind of treatment in my life. I'm not surprised that your family left you. With an attitude like that, I would have dropped you up at a care home first chance that I got as well." I hurled insult after insult at him, digging deep to dredge out the nastiest side of me, fully expecting Parker to go off on me in return. But instead he stood there and took it all, with each colorful word leaving my mouth. The corners of his lips pulled a little further up into a satisfied grin. Now he stopped when I ran out of breath, and he waited a moment to make sure that I was done. "What did you say your name was again?" he asked. "Jessica." "Jessica," he repeated, letting each letter roll off his tongue. "I tell you what, I like you." And that was that. He returned to staring out the window, and I was able to carry out my work in peace. I had regretted the outburst for a while, feared that it would somehow come back to bite me in the butt and get me fired. But Parker didn't tell anyone. It was our little secret. Every day after that, he would grin when he saw me. He still gave me lip, but it was different, more jovial. Not trying to insult me and drive me away, just to tease me. But I could work with him without breaking down into tears afterwards, so I took my win. After a while, I started teasing him back. He would call me his insult of the day, and I called him mine, and we would laugh it off and move on. What I'm trying to say is that we developed this weird bond, and I actually started having fun. I started looking forward to it. We didn't talk about anything else, and I didn't know the first thing about him, and he didn't know the first thing about me. But in my eyes, that only added to the charm. Life moved on, and before I noticed, I had been working there for years. Rumors about Parker abounded. Everyone had their theories and beliefs, but I couldn't confirm or deny any of them. The man was still as much of a mystery to me as he had been on the first day. And then one day, about a month ago, things had started to change. He would make less comments. He spent more and more time in his room, isolating from everyone. And Parker had always been very self-sufficient for someone his age. But he started needing help with things, and I could see that it killed him on the inside. I didn't mind, that was what I was getting paid for, but the man had his pride. He refused to be seen by a medic and get treatment, so we all had expected him to kick the bucket soon. A prospect that made most everyone in that care home happy, but I for one dreaded it. Even so, I knew better than to try and talk to him about it. One evening before I went home, I checked on him. Parker was in his usual spot in the recliner, drapes drawn aside and window wide open. The sun was already gone, sunken below the horizon, painting it red as night had creeped in. He didn't acknowledge my presence, not until I had stopped next to him. "Hey, Jessica," he greeted, his voice a low rumble. I nearly went for a "hey, fart bone," but the sound of my name and the way that he said it gave me pause. For the first time in the many years that I had known him, he sounded serious for once. A pit of dread formed in my stomach. "Everything all right, Mr. Parker?" His lips curled at the corners, pulling his gaunt face into a smile. A dry, raspy chuckle left his throat, but he let my question linger in the air for a long moment. "Going home for the night?" he asked. "Yes." "Could you stay just for a little while longer?" "Of course." I knew what this meant. Parker felt that his time was coming, and he wanted someone next to him. I leaned in to take his hand into mine, but the guy will still be the same to the very end. He slapped my hand away, so we stood there in awkward silence, watching the night settle outside. "You're the closest thing that I have to a friend, Jessica," he said out of the blue. The closest thing that I have to a family. He let out another chuckle, but it sounded sad. God, I'm so pathetic. I put a hand on his shoulder, and this time he didn't slap it away. I had no idea what exactly to say. Parker wasn't one for sappy speeches. So in the end, I went with the truth. As blunt as it was, I figured that he would appreciate my honest opinion. It's your fault for being a grumpy old fart. You could have had so many friends here, so why didn't you? Do you have any plans tonight? He asked, and I nodded a no. Then, can I answer your question with a story? Sure. He shifted in the recliner, biding his time as he searched for the right words. I had seen it all before in others. They think themselves ready to open up until the time comes to actually do it. With a sigh, he resigned himself to the situation and started speaking. Parker was born in a small town in the 1940s, right off the back of the Second World War. He had an older brother and a father, neither of which he remembers. The first died of some disease as a child, and the second got drafted and died overseas while Parker was still a baby. That left his mother alone to raise him, but they weren't the only ones struggling to make ends meet in that town. Most everyone else did too. Life back then was harsh, especially for isolated communities like theirs. But I had a decent enough childhood, Parker had assured me. My mother did her best, working herself to the bone and going hungry most nights to make sure that I didn't. He took a short pause, prying his gaze away from the window to make eye contact with me. I could tell that he was uncomfortable. Dwelling on the past brought him a great deal of anguish. But he looked away from me after a long moment, back at the dark world outside, and he continued speaking. Despite his mother's best efforts, his childhood was short-lived. Parker had to grow up fast and to become dependable, to help around the house and find work. It wasn't that uncommon back then. Kids as young as 8 or 9 working shoulder to shoulder with the adults didn't have much of a choice. Things such as getting an education or waiting until they were adults, those were little more than pipe dreams. But luckily, Parker was big for someone his age. At only 10, he was taller and stronger than his 15-year-old friends. He could handle this manual labor, and having an extra set of hands to go around, a second breadwinner, it did wonders for their household. I still remember getting my first ever pay, he said with a sad smile. A small sum, but I was proud. Mother wanted me to spend it on myself to get something nice, but I didn't. I bought a sack of flour for her to make bread out of, and I used the fabric to make myself a new pair of shorts. I'm so sorry, I stuttered. Yeah, me too. But time went on. Parker kept working throughout the years, living life one day at a time. Trouble was never far off, but he faced it head on. The adults always tried to shortchange him for his work, and other kids tried to bully him out of his meager earnings regularly. The first time that happened, I came home empty-handed with a broken nose and a busted lip, he said bitterly. 5 of them had teamed up on me. It was a dog-eat-dog world back then. When he was about 13 and his mother brought home a new man, Parker had hoped for a change, a chance for him to have a father, a role model, somebody to teach him how to be a man himself. He thought that life would get easier. Know how wrong I was, he said. That man was an alcoholic abuser. Parker and his mother found out as much soon enough. Her sooner than him, but he saw the signs. Even though he still worked and brought his earnings home, food was suddenly in short supply. His mother always had bruises that she tried to hide, and his stepfather was always drunk. When I had returned home beaten up again by the older kids, I was hopeful for once. I thought that he would go out there and do something about it. And he didn't? I asked with hesitation. Parker huffed. He beat me up as well for being a sissy, in his own words. It better not happen again, you hear me? He said that the next time I come home empty-handed, he would show me a real beatdown. Why didn't you run away, or get the authorities involved? Run away? Where to? Parker answered, and the authorities didn't give a crap. He kept enduring it for the sake of his mother. Couldn't leave her all alone with the stepfather, but it escalated gradually. Soon enough, his stepfather would take Parker's money outright, and then he would beat his mother out in the open. It wasn't long until he raised his hand at me at the regular, Parker said, but it kept my mother safe, so I endured it. On the nights that I'd get beaten up, she was safe. And those nights only got more common as time went on. At first, Parker would get beaten up for stepping in, taking the place of his mother. Then he would get beaten up for not bringing enough money home, then for no reason at all. At some point, I couldn't take it anymore and I snapped, Parker admitted. The other kids stole my money again and I was afraid to go home that night, afraid of what he would do to me. So I ran off into the woods looking for a place to sleep. And instead I found this old well. Old well? I asked, not sure what it had to do with anything up to that point. Old well, Parker confirmed. You know, a hole in the ground for people to get drinking water. I know what a well is. At any rate, he found this old well, a dilapidated thing long out of use and in serious disrepair. Parker nearly fell down into it when he leaned over the edge to peer down. He threw a pebble into it, but it never landed, and then he tried spitting into it and yelling down into the shaft. It echoed for a long time, much longer than it should have. Parker listened in awe as his own voice reverberated from the well for minutes on end, not getting any fainter. But awe aside, it gave him an idea. I didn't like the sound of that. I did end up returning home that night, Parker said. I found him taking his frustration out on my mother since I wasn't there and he chased me when he saw me. Parker led his stepfather out of town and into the woods, farther away from civilization, deeper and deeper between trees until he heard the faint echo of the well still calling out. I hid nearby and kept quiet, he said. Waited for him to find the well, and he did. He heard the echoes of my scream, and I thought I fell down into the dang thing trying to hide. He laughed about it. His stepfather approached the well and leaned over the edge, still laughing. You learned your lesson yet? Parker imitated him. Little did he know that I did. It just wasn't the lesson that he wanted me to learn. Parker burst out from his hiding place while his stepfather was distracted and ran up at him. All it took was a single push, he said grimly. A single push and he tumbled over the edge, fell into that abyss head first, screaming all the way to the bottom. From that day onward, the echo of his voice joined mine in the well. The authorities pretended to search for him for a few days, but no one truly even cared about it. He was just an alcoholic, so everybody thought that he had gotten his comeuppance, that he had died in a ditch somewhere, or that he ran away in search of greener pastures and other people to terrorize. No one suspected us, Parker said. Not my mother, who was too weak to fight back, and they considered me just a kid. No way in their eyes for either one of us to kill an adult man. With him out of the picture, though, Parker's life improved somewhat. He still earned a pittance, and the other kids still bullied him, but at least he could rest easy in his own home. I went to that well every day at first, and then every other day, and then once a week at most. But the screams, they never stopped, day and night. They got fainter, barely a whisper in the wind, but I could still hear them. Didn't it scare you?" "It terrified me," Parker admitted. "But I also saw the possibilities." That answer terrified me. I contemplated for a moment to call it a night, to put an end to Parker's confession and leave. But I was also curious for better or worse. "Next up were the kids that bullied me," Parker continued. "It took me a long time to build up the courage to even consider it. But enough of it will push you reasonable men to unreasonable actions." The group was 5 members strong, their leader 19 years old and the youngest about Parker's age. The rest were all in between. Starving street urchins, Parker had called them. Either orphans or with home lives similar to his own, that pushed them to run away and brave the world. "Except they were lazy," Parker said. "They took the easy way out, stealing, conning, and bullying other kids like they did to me. The community wasn't happy with them, but they never targeted adults, so they were tolerated. Until they beat up Parker for the 100th time and he decided that he had had enough. I only wanted to get rid of their leader," he said. "I thought their little clique would break apart without him, but I couldn't separate them." Parker tried to challenge him to a one-on-one fight outside of town, but he came with the rest of his group and he was pissed. You could see the bloodlust in his eyes from a mile away. I knew that they would give it to me like never before, so I had no other choice. All 5 of them had to go. Parker ran away, and just like his stepfather, they had chased him into the woods. He hid near the well again, and when they got closer to inspect the echoing voices, Parker had repeated his earlier stunt. "I pushed the oldest boy first," he said in a stone-cold voice. "And then before the others had a chance to wise up, I pushed the second oldest as well. The others were smaller and I could take them. They tried to run away, to escape with their lives, but I couldn't let them." Parker chased them down and he caught up to the youngest first. He tripped the boy from behind and stomped on his knee to break it, and then he kept going. The second one he grabbed by the shoulders and swung into a tree head first, snapping his neck. I tackled the last one and got him into a chokehold. He kicked his legs and clawed at my arm and tried to bite me a few times. When he realized that he couldn't break free, he started pleading, begging for his life. Told me that he wouldn't speak a single word about what happened there. He begged like that all the way to the well, until his legs were over the edge. The boy with the broken neck followed, and the one with the broken leg had dragged himself quite the distance by the time that Parker had got to him. But he went through with it, and that night the well gained 5 more voices. Parker stopped his retelling for a moment and stared off into the distance. At first, I thought he was either giving me a breather, a bit of time to process what I had heard, or that he was searching for words. I looked outside as well, and the silhouette of a tree against the starry night sky shook in the distance. A reverberating scream followed. "Oh, we don't have much time left. I have to hurry up," Parker whispered. I was frozen by his side as he picked up the story, in shock and in fear, not knowing what was about to go down or what I should do. I had witnessed a few confessions by that point, but none came even close to Parker's. He had confessed to 6 murders in just as many minutes, and I was sure that there would be a few more by the time that he would be done with me. "The guilt ate me up inside," he confessed. "I went by the well every single day, fighting back the urge to jump into it myself." No one missed those kids, and no one in the community blamed Parker. He wasn't the only one getting bullied by them, and on some level, everyone was glad that they were gone. One less problem in their lives, so they were happy to pretend the 5 ran off somewhere to carry out bigger heists. I was depressed for years because of it, but I kept telling myself that I had to do it, that my life was better now. Lies that I only half believed, but they got me out of bed in the morning. Another tree shook outside, closer to us, but there wasn't a scream this time. Parker flinched visibly. Anyway, the years flew by. People kept leaving the small town, flocking to bigger cities in search of work. I was one of them and found this wonderful girl, and I left with her. They took Parker's mother as well, and the three of them found work at some factory or another. And for a few years he thought that he had left the small town and his horrible deeds behind. Until I started hearing screams in the night, voices that I recognized. I thought I was imagining it at first. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing more than me just going insane with guilt. Another tree shook outside, followed by a howl. And let me guess, it was all too real. Parker nodded his head. My mother went missing one evening and we never found her. The big city police took it a bit more seriously, but they couldn't dig up a single lead. No witnesses, no suspects, nothing. But Parker knew exactly where to find her, or what was left of her. After a long trip back to his hometown and a trek through the woods, his worst fears were confirmed. His mother's voice had joined the tortured chorus in the well. I broke down right then and there, cried in that forest by myself all night long. It was supposed to be me, not her. He returned home though, if only for the sake of his girlfriend and soon-to-be wife. She was pregnant and they would soon have their first child, and Parker wanted a better life for them than he had had growing up. He would be there for his kids, there for his wife, there to make sure that they would be all right. They got married with little fanfare, few friends and even fewer family members for a proper wedding, and their child was born a couple of months later. The most beautiful baby girl in the world, Parker explained with a glint in his eyes. Holding her, hearing her crying, it was all that I ever wanted. Enough to justify everything that I had done and been through in a heartbeat. Another tree shook outside and something took contour in the underbrush at the edge of the property. I let out a yelp and Parker reached for me. He grabbed my forearm and held me steady as I tried to back away. We still have a few minutes, he said calmly. And don't worry, it's not here for you. You're safe. He proceeded with the rest of his story, and I had to try my hardest to divide my attention between him and whatever was out there. I treasured every moment with my wife and daughter, but you know how these things go. She grew up in a heartbeat, and before I realized it, she spoke her first words and took her first steps, moments that I couldn't be prouder of as a father. The thing bellowed, a guttural sound that rattled my bones. A dying animal was my first thought, a coyote getting murdered or a fox going into heat. I took a step forward into the faint circle of light surrounding the care home, and I saw a human face, and then another and another one, contorted in agony and held together to form a gigantic head. And then that thing returned once more, Parker said, raising a hand to point at the advancing beast. More cries in the night, more screams and howls. I knew what it wanted, but I couldn't let it have me or my family. Another stab brought its neck and torso into view, pulsing muscles crisscrossing each other at random, skin stretched until pulled taut, dozens of human arms jutting out of it in random places. Its myriad of eyes moved every which way, scanning and searching. I knew that I had to do something before it was too late, to either get rid of it or appease it, and I knew what it wanted. What? I asked, stuttering and shaking with fear. People, bodies, victims, Parker answered. More of them. I had opened up its appetite and now it was hungry. If I didn't give it what it wanted, it would get it itself. Take my world from me. I didn't want to do it and I tried to talk myself out of it, up until the very last moment. But I was pressed for time and worried sick for my family. So I went back into town. For a moment, I wished my eyes could do the same thing the creatures did. I wanted to turn and look at Parker and to see his face, but I didn't dare take my eyes off of it. Every last muscle in my body was clenched, holding me in place. I was barely able to breathe, and it took another step forward, and all of those dead and beady eyes focused. Every last one of them pinned on the window, on the room, on me and Parker. I kidnapped someone, Parker said, his voice fraying into a cry at the edges. An older man living all by himself. I knew him. He had been a widower for decades, and he knew me. He barely fought back as I tied and gagged him. I expected him to play it as well, like the kids had. I expected him to fight me. But the silence, it was worse somehow. Did he know about that thing? I managed to push out a question. What? No, of course not, Parker answered. He was just old and frail, and he knew that he couldn't do anything to stop me. Maybe he had given up on life long ago, like I ended up doing, I don't know. The rest of the monster came into view as it advanced towards the open window, and there was so much more to it than I expected. So many legs moving haphazardly, slapping the lawn at awkward angles to pull the body along. It felt surreal, like that window was a screen, and I was merely watching some cheap horror movie with even cheaper special effects. That night, I dragged the old man out of town and through the woods. I got him to the well, said a short prayer for his soul, and I tipped him over the edge. He went down without a sound. The monster stopped a few feet away from the window and craned its head forward. At that point, I was pretty much useless, more of an ornament than an active participant. Parker let go of me and moved to get up, falling twice. His old bones were all out of strength, but he still had his determination. The third attempt saw him to his feet, even if a bit wobbly. I returned to my wife and daughter after that, he said, taking a step towards the window, and all was fine for a while. Seeing her smile growing up, having her by my side, it kept the guilt at bay. She was my world, and I was ready to do anything to keep my world from crumbling. The monster cooed. One of its many faces moved across its skin, pushing against the rest until it got to the forefront. A wide smile took over its lips, replacing the agonized expression. The next time the screams returned, I knew what I had to do. Knew what the rest of my life would be like, what sins I had to commit. Every few years, I would return to that cursed town, kidnap someone in the dead of night, and throw them into the well. That smile on the face at the forefront only grew wider, but the rest didn't match. They started whispering aggressively, their voices merging as they got louder. I had kept at it until my daughter grew up, until she found a boy she wanted to marry and moved out, until everyone had left that town behind, to be an empty shell for the forest to retake, and I called it a job well done. I thought my daughter was safe and that I could finally let the monster take me, that I would finally atone for all of my sins. Parker closed the gap to the window, and so did the monster. It pushed its many arms into the room, hands both big and small, grasping at the air as they tried to reach him. And what happened to her? I asked. The question felt strange, coming up my throat and leaving my mouth, like it was uttered by someone a million miles away, completely detached from the situation. Parker extended one of his arms but paused and turned to face me. What do you think happened, Jessica? He asked in a somber voice. What do you think pushed me on the run for the rest of my life? Made me grow wary of approaching people and making friends? I held back the answer, if only because I had one more question. Why tell me all of this? Parker smirked, the same mischievous grin that I had gotten used to from him. "'Cause I'm a selfish old son of a gun," he said matter-of-factly. "I wanted at least one person to know and maybe miss me, and now you do." He took the final step that brought him within the monster's reach, and it got a hold of his arm with 100 fingers. The many eyes looked past Parker directly at me. "Thank you, Jessica," Parker said, his back to me. "You can leave now. That would be best." I didn't argue with him on that. I slowly walked backwards towards the door. My head was heavy, mind spinning, and my legs felt like unsteady stilts 100 feet long. But I did it. I reached the door, backed out into the corridor, and closed it gently. Parker watched me the whole time, a peaceful smile on his lips until the latch had clicked. The rest of the night was a blur. I wandered to the break room with tears streaming down my face, but I didn't even realize that I was crying until I tried to light a cigarette and a tear had fell on it. My hand shook like an earthquake, as did the rest of me. I smoked about half the pack, waiting and praying for that thing to leave so that I could too. A couple of hours later, I finally built up the courage to bolt it out of the care home into my car. I drove home in a haze, eyes darting at every little movement, and I didn't manage to sleep a wink until the break of dawn. But I returned to the care home for my next shift, looking like a ghost. Police were there interrogating everyone about Parker's disappearance, and I lied to them. Couldn't possibly tell them the truth, not when I don't even know where that well is. So yeah, I lied to them until they left me alone. I lied until they packed in their car and drove off. Everyone else is awfully happy that Parker is finally gone, and I stand out among them like a sore thumb. Sitting in his recliner, writing this as sunset approaches, I realized that he was right on both accounts. He was a selfish old man, and he left behind someone who misses him.